We have, it's 6 o'clock, and I know Caleb's not going to be able to make it tonight. He had something come up that he just unavoidable. And we have a quorum, and we have quite a full agenda, so I think we're going to get started. Just a reminder to everybody, if you're not talking, to mute yourself so that we don't get a lot of feedback. So I'll call us to order at 6 o'clock, and Chris is to take our minutes. She's here, so thank you, Chris. And there is any public comment at this time, you'll raise your hand. Oh, Patrick, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so as has become tradition, January is School Board Recognition Month. This is the meeting when we normally would have had cake. Cake is tricky this time with COVID and all. But I think it's still really important that we recognize you as a school board and individuals as school board members for what I would say may be the most challenging and important time to be a school board member that I can think of in the past 50 years, as we are on the cusp of having to make some really important decisions for the future of our school district. The work you do tends to be thankless, incredibly difficult in the circumstances that we find ourselves in. You're under tremendous pressures from many different angles, and you keep showing up. It's pretty remarkable, and it shows your dedication to our community and the students for MAUSD. And I just want to make sure that you know it is very much appreciated. And though I don't have cake for everyone, what I will have for everyone is a little plaque. It's made on plexiglass, which is fitting given our COVID realities. Like, this will be a nice piece of memorabilia of your time as a school board member during COVID. And I want to read a little bit. There will be one for each of you, kind of personalized, that has your name, as well as any subcommittees you've been a part of, etc. And at the bottom, it will say, in recognition of your personal sacrifice to help ensure the children of MAUSD become lifelong learners, their personal best, and responsible and informed citizens of their local and global community at a cost deemed acceptable by the community. That, I think it's a bit of a mashup of the end preamble and our mission statement that I think reflects the work you do on at least a monthly, in all reality, practically a daily basis during these times. So those will be mailed to each of you. You should receive them over the weekend or into the early part of next week. So thank you.
On another note, you all should have gotten a little card from the VSBA to get your pair of socks from Darn Tufts. Yeah. You didn't get it yet? Annie, are you getting anything from VSBA? Okay, maybe we can get that, be sure she gets added on to the VSBA list. Anybody else not getting VSBA stuff?
I'll pass that along. Annie is not getting messages from VSBA, is that right?
Correct. Thank you. All right, is there any other public comment? If you raise your virtual hand or your real hand, I'll skim through. Let's see if I could. I'm not seeing any virtual hands. Dave's got his hand up.
Thank you. Thank you, Patrick, for that recognition. When I was in the legislature and had occasion to talk to school boards around the state, I often said that it's the most difficult volunteer job in our state government. And I didn't, I said that and I believed it, but I didn't experience it until this year. So thank you, Patrick, for that recognition.
Right. There's somebody with a mic open. I can't tell who it is. Okay. All right, so moving on, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved, Andrew.
Andrew? Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Steve?
Steve?
Okay. Is anyone opposed to approving the consent agenda? If you are, board members, would you raise your hand, virtual or otherwise? Dave, you are opposed to approving the consent agenda?
Well, I'd just like to ask some questions about the minutes, right? They're in the consent agenda. Is it now an appropriate time? Because I did have some questions about the minutes.
Typically, you have to make them before the consent agenda motion is made. You have to make a motion to pull to talk about specific items.
I didn't know that.
Dave, we can also just vote down the motion and then have you make a motion to pull something if you want to talk about it.
Okay.
Okay, is there anyone opposed to approving the consent agenda? So let's see, Sarah and Rob and Dave. Did I miss any board members who are opposed?
Steve,
I got Dave, Sarah, and Sarah, and Rob.
and
Three of you.
Steve.
It's Steve.
So does opposed just mean that that would give an opportunity for somebody to talk about it more? And if we approve, then we can't talk about it more? Is that
Correct.
okay? So I'd be interested in hearing it. So I'm opposed.
As am I.
Krista. Is that Krista?
Yes, so sorry, I think Liz just said this, but if Dave had just made a motion to pull something, we wouldn't be doing this. But
Correct,
since he didn't, got it. Okay,
correct.
so I'm opposed, so we can talk about it.
So we have 6 who are opposed.
I'll do the same thing. It's fine.
Okay, all right. So that motion canceled. So Dave, your motion is to
My
pull.
motion would be to pull the minutes. I think the other things, I don't have a problem with the other things.
Okay,
Well, I do have I have a question about the director's policy, but that's just that it would have been nice to have it highlighted like it was in the minutes, what the changes were.
so your comment on the minutes?
My comments on the minutes. So let's see if I can pull them up here.
Don, are we supposed to pull the minutes and approve the rest of the agenda and then talk about the minutes?
No, we can talk about it because maybe they just go back in with the corrections and then we can move the whole thing as once.
All right.
So I'm searching for the things that I highlighted. One of them I remember off the top of my head was my suggestion for realigning middle and high school would be to send 7, 8, and 9 to Virgins and 10, 11, and 12 to Mount Abe. I haven't found, I tried to highlight it in.
Okay, go. I can't.
So I'm talking about the minutes of January 20th.
Okay,
I called Tim at 5. He was just leaving Rutland.
Oh, yeah, I talked with him and he said the weather wasn't bad.
Oh, I can't find it, but it's in there somewhere. I have like 10 documents open. So elsewhere, in the minutes of 120, at the 6:05 time frame, discussing the results of the survey, it said that the response rate was 23%. And I believe that statement was made. But when I did the math, I could not figure out where 23% came from. 23% of 1655, which is all of the returns, is more than the 651 responses. But that was electronic. So how do you calculate the percent responses from electronics when that goes out into the internet? And there are thousands of those, as well as the 6,500 that were mailed. I just didn't understand where the percentages came from.
I don't know whether Krista or Rob can speak to that from the minutes of that meeting and provide any clarity.
Sure. So that is a good point, Dave. We did the percent response rate based on those mailed. Well, and those mailed and those emailed to students, because we knew how many students received it based on, the numbers of students at Mount Abe. But and that is where we got the 23%. But you're right, we don't really know beyond that how many people had access to the link. So it's based on the registered voters and residents as given to us by town clerks, plus Mount Abe students that responded.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Then later in that same paragraph, it says the question of reducing staff and programming was close to a 50-50 split. That sentence doesn't make any sense to me. Is it saying 50% we're reducing staff and 50% we're reducing programming? Is that what is the statement supposed to, is that how I interpret that statement?
Is this a question about the survey? Sorry, can you tell me
Yes.
where we are, Dave? So we're in the
The
in the minutes of the-
6:05 time frame of the minutes.
Yep. Okay. So let's see. Question of reducing staff and programming is close to a 50-50 split. I'm assuming that that's referring to the percent of respondents that supported versus those that did not support the scenario of reducing staff and programming as a way to solve our financial crisis. Rob, do you want to weigh in on that one at all? That's my guess. of where we're
David,
at.
is your question a clarity of, is half of it saying staff and half saying programs?
Yeah, I didn't know whether it was 50-50 split referred to a split of what? Between staff and programming, or between pro and con staff and programming, pro staff and programming and con staff and programming?
Yeah, it's the latter. We didn't separate those two out in the survey.
Okay, thank you. And then just below that, it says, when asked what tax increase folks would support in order to keep their town school, 49.9% supported 0 to 5, which is the usual year-to-year increase in the budget anyway. So the zero, if I remember correctly, the 0 to 5% referred to over a 5-year period. So it should read supported 0 to 5%, which is far below the 5-year increase, nor 5-year usual increase in the budget. I mean, it does reflect, I think, how most people read that particular question, that people were, that the question that what we really wanted to ask was an annual increase of 0 to 5%, but that's not what the question asked.
I'm okay with that change. I don't know what procedurally we do, Don. Rob, you and I presented on this, and I understand the clarification. And I think I agree with it, but do we have to vote to make a change to what the minutes say to reflect that, or?
You can just, I think Chris is probably capturing what we're saying. And so
Okay.
when we go ahead, we'll say the minutes with the corrections, and then they will be corrected. The draft will be corrected and adopted. Or
Gotcha.
approved.
Gotcha.
Kevin,
Do you want to?
Did you have a question?
I think we can table those minutes and then bring them back up next month.
Yeah, I mean, that was the other thing I was wondering about, because I think we're getting into the meat of the survey, and I think, we haven't had a chance to discuss it at length after folks have had some time to chew on it. So I'm okay with changing that to better reflect the question and the answer, but I also think, the idea is that we're going to revisit this again.
So I have another question further down on the next page, the 6:50 time frame. It says P. Reen responded that the board would continue to work from year to year and to minimize the impact as difficulties unfold. So I presume it should read D. Griswold responded that the board would continue to work. Or Patrick may have said he presumed that the board would continue to work, but to put in the minutes that the superintendent would tell the board what they were going to do just isn't correct language.
My
So it sounds
recollection
like
of that it was around the question of what's the backup plan, what's in the event that we don't have some other longer range plan to enact. And my recollection was that my response was that we would need to sort of respond year to year in the absence of a longer range plan. So the we is really the collective we. I think that's me working with the school board to understand the implications and work to adjust accordingly as the financial situation unfolds year over year.
That sounds likely. Then that's the way the language should reflect.
Well, it also says that P. Reed responded that the board would continue to work from year to year. So it's not really saying that Patrick would be telling the board. I think his response was that that's his expectation is that the board would continue to work from year to year.
And it should have the word expectation in there.
So we can always listen to the video, watch the video and hear it again, and then make the corrections. We can table the minutes. I don't know if Dave, you want to go back and listen to the video again and see if you can capture your recommendation for the changes.
No, these are my observations. You can do what you want with them.
Any other comments on the minutes? And then Dave, did you say you had a question about the director's policy?
Yeah, geez. It was just a comment that in one of the things that I had to review, it was highlighted what the changes were. It was not in the board description, and my comment just is that it's really helpful. I had to line them up side by side from the website, policy title 4.2 and what was being proposed, and then figure out what the change was by reading through all. And I learned a bunch. I guess that's a good thing. But it would be helpful if changes, when we proposed changes in documents, if it were highlighted what those changes were when we were considering them.
So I'm not certain, but I think you're mixing two together, but the director's policy is in the adopt phase. And I think it's earlier in the stage of warning it, you see that language change, and then as we get closer to adopting it, I think that goes away. It's sort of a final copy of what the language would look like.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I have a dozen or so of documents opened. When I look at the consent agenda, I think it's adopt revised director's policy where the language was highlighted. And I think it was adopt language addition to policy A 4.2.1 where the change was not highlighted. And it took me an extra, I don't know, 15 minutes to sort out what the changes were. And I'm just making the comment that it's really helpful when we're considering changes if the changes are highlighted in the text that we're considering.
So noted. Thank you.
Dawn,
Yes.
all right. Could I get some clarification on what corrections Dave wants made to the minutes? They got lost in discussion and back and forth. So what correction should it actually say?
Well, the one that's attributed to me where I supposedly said I wanted some grades for gens and other grades at Mount Abe, the grades that were mentioned were different than what I proposed. I proposed 7, 8, and 9, 7 through 9 in Virgins, and 10, 11, and 12 at Mount Abe.
What minutes is this in, Dave?
I think they may be, I don't know, in the 13, the 113 minutes. I'm trying to find it, but I'm failing. But I know I read it.
All right. 6, 7, and 8 to Virgins and bringing Virgins high school students to Mount Abe.
7, 8, and 9 in Virgins,
Okay.
and 10, 11, and 12 at Mount Abe.
Okay.
And I'll keep looking. As soon as I find it, I'll let you know.
It's in the 113 at the 7 o'clock hour.
Thank you, Steve.
Are there any other corrections you want her to make to the minutes? Dave?
No, well, I didn't make specific language corrections, but I think it should be reflected, the comments I made. You don't want me to make them again, do you?
Let's see where Chris is. Chris, do you need any further clarification?
I got on the 20th from the 6:05 that Dave thinks it should be stated that my problem is I'm not sure that that's what was actually said during the meeting. So I don't know how to handle that procedurally. I'll take direction from the board for that.
So how about this? How about we table the 120 minutes? I'll go back and listen to the video and read the minutes and be sure if I see any differences to point them out and come back next time with the corrections or differences. Does that work for everybody?
Yeah, it works for me.
Redeemable or just recyclable?
So when the consent agenda comes, we're going to remind that we're going to table the 120 minutes for further clarification, and everything else is good to go.
And make the changes on the 113 where
Right.
I was quoted.
I think she's captured those. So we'll do corrections 113, table the 120, the 1222 will go ahead and approve along with the rest of the consent agenda, and well, 1222, 113 will be approved, and the rest the 120 we'll deal with next time.
Great.
Make sense?
Dave, did you want the word expectation after that Patrick Green statement?
Yes.
Did you catch that, Chris? Chris?
That's from the 20th.
That's
Yeah.
on the 113 in the 7 o'clock, I believe, at the same location as the other suggestion.
I think it's in the 120.
Yeah, I think it's in the 120 is what I wrote.
So I'll wait for Dawn's clarification on that.
Okay, is that agreeable to everyone?
Yep.
Okay, all right. So now back to the consent agenda.
All right.
Approving the minutes for 12/22 and 113 with corrections. And the 121 minutes, the 120/21 minutes will be tabled for clarification. The pay orders to adopt the revised director's policy and adopt the language addition to policy A4.2.1. So, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
And you have
So
a
moved.
letter E, Don, as well.
Oh, sorry. E, accept the resignation of Kay McKim. Sorry. Is there
So
a motion?
moved. Andrew.
Andrew?
Second, Sarah McLean.
Okay. All right. Is there anyone opposed to the approving the consent agenda with all those factors factored in? Okay. So all in favor, please say, give me an eye, I guess.
Aye.
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 Okay. All right. Sorry, I think I'm gonna go back to calling people. This is way, it's not going as smoothly as I planned tonight. So, all right, moving on now to executive limitations monitoring report, communication and support to the board. It's the Mount Abraham student activism to speak about the Black Lives Matter flag at Mount Abraham. So I don't know who's gonna start that.
I think I'll introduce Shannon Warden, principal at Mount Abraham, and I think she's going to do some introductions and we're going to hear from some students. So take it away, Shannon.
Great, thank you. Thank you for having us on your agenda. I know that you are very busy. So I'm here just to support our Mount Abraham Student Activism Group. They have a presentation put together for you. I'm really proud of this organization that operates out of Mount Abe. They meet on mostly Wednesdays, their remote day, and the group has been growing this year with lots of interest, lots of passion, and lots of dedication for the work. And they came to Community Council again with a new proposal that they're going to share with you. And it was really an exciting time to be part of Community Council. At one meeting, I think we had maybe close to 30 people. And we had actual community members that weren't on Community Council, which was really exciting and really great to see the democratic process play out. And they can speak about their experience with Community Council, but it's not a formality. So proposals that come in aren't automatically voted on. There's a lot of devil's advocate speaking and a lot of questioning, and we really examine all sides of an issue before we take a vote. So we're very thorough, and I think they talk about the length of time that it took for this most recent proposal in their presentation. So there are two representatives that are going to speak, Anna Doucette and Abby Johnson, but I see a number of other MASA students on the call, so I want to recognize them for giving up time on a Tuesday evening to join the board meeting. So I will pass it over to Anna and Abby. Patrick, if you can share your screen and just advance the slides when they are ready.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? All right, thanks. Yeah, I'm Abby Johnson, and I'm a part of MASA. Anna, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, everybody. My name is Anna Doucette. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm also a part of MASA.
Yep, also she, her. It's in the Zoom space. All right, so yeah, like Shannon talked about, we came to Community Council a couple weeks ago with a proposal to keep the Black Lives Matter flag flying indefinitely, and it recently passed. Patrick, if you would go down. Oh, well, this is just for your guys' enjoyment. I threw in a couple of pictures. This is a couple of us earlier this year, but you can keep scrolling. All right, so just some background on why this proposal was necessary, and just the origins of the Black Lives Matter flag at Mount Abe in general. So in 2018, Community Council passed a proposal to raise the Black Lives Matter flag at Mount Abe for a period of 30 days. And then after that, it would be hung in the lobby. And so from 2018 to 2020, no real substantial action was taken to raise that flag. But then on November 20th, 2020, the flag was raised by Nina and Bridget Hiron with organizational help from MASA and the Diversity and Equity Committee. And that was basically a group of adults that collaborated with some MASA members just to work on the logistics of the whole operation because it had already been passed. So all we had to do was get it up. All right. And then this is just a picture of said action on November 20th. And there are Bridget, Nina, and Shannon Warden raising it.
All right, so following the flag being raised for the initial 30 days, MASA began to feel as though it was important to keep the flag up indefinitely. So about 2 weeks before the flag came down, we made a proposal and brought it to Community Council to keep the flag up indefinitely. We felt like the 30-day limit was not enough to really drive home the message that Black Lives Matter. They will not only matter for 30 days and they will continue to matter. And we believed that recognizing that Black Lives Matter for more than 30 days would ensure that we are not erasing the 400 years of oppression of Black people in this country. And we also believed that although the flag was going to be moved into the lobby, having it on the flagpole provided a clearer view of the flag to the community, and it had a more powerful message, particularly because it was under the American flag and we were able to make it more accessible to the community. So to gather support for our proposal, we created and circulated a petition, which we ended up gathering 601 signatures for, including those of Representative Mari Cordes and Senator Ruth Hardy. And this petition was meant to demonstrate to the community to Community Council that their constituents supported the flag being up. And so we invited students, teachers, parents, community members, and other staff to sign. And after 3 weeks of discussion, the proposal was passed with a unanimous vote by Community Council.
All right, so some of you may be wondering, what do we do now, now that we have a flag to be raised indefinitely for the rest of the foreseeable future? So we're working to get it back up, and by that I mean MASA, and the Diversity and Equity.
Mobilize the National Guard. FEMA, what's going on?
Hey, Don, I think you can mute everyone, yourself or whomever's the host of the meeting can do that.
80% of our people have been vaccinated. We are not leaving any on the shelf.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, let's see. Thank you, Patrick. All right, so first and foremost, in terms of the physical logistics, we're working on ordering a new flag, one that's more durable and can sustain the wind damage that it will no likely endure. And then we're also putting together educational anti-racist resources with the help from the Diversity and Equity Committee, which Anna will explain further on. And of course, we are in the first draft stages of our press release, which will go out to the greater 5-town community. And once all those things are put together, it'll be raised again by Mount Abe community members. The specific logistics aren't completely finalized, but we're thinking something similar along the lines of what happened, but maybe with a few tweaks.
One of the biggest points that was brought up when we were discussing this proposal with Community Council was continued education around the flag, especially regarding what the flag is and isn't and what it represents, because it's easy to get confused with the politicizing of the Black Lives Matter movement. And so we wanted to ensure that continued education, not only about Black Lives Matter, but about other marginalized groups continued to happen at our school. And so MASA and the Diversity and Equity Committee have worked together to create educational resources for the student body, which will be presented during advisory time. Our focus in January is on Black History Month, and our coming topics include white supremacy and anti-Semitism, LGBTQ rights, Indigenous rights, and likely a few other topics surrounding that category. And these resources are meant to uplift marginalized voices and help to educate particularly white students, but all students, on their roles and responsibilities in our school community to ensure that we are an actively anti-racist community and that we are actively educating ourselves. And so each month we will have a topic that will be explored and discussed in advisory. And we have plans to further explore curriculum changes to root out cultural appropriation in the community and to support BIPOC voices in whichever ways we can.
In conclusion, so we hope that this board will continue to support MASA's efforts, and we look forward to continued communication with you all, and we welcome any questions, suggestions, and ideas of how MASA can be of better use to Mount Abe as a whole. And there's us.
Thank you, Abby and Anna. I'm so proud of this group, and I don't know that I've ever been prouder to be an educator and part of something that's so powerful and just bigger than us. I get a little emotional, and the kids have seen that many times now in meetings, so they're used to that. It's just really, it's incredible. So if you have questions or comments for them, feel free, they're ready.
I have a question. Hi, you guys. I'm Sarah. Great presentation, Abby and Anna. I'm curious, I would love to see the Diversity and Equity Committee reach out to the elementary schools and help that process for educating our elementary students. I think it would be so well received from Mount Abe students. So just to kind of plant that seed, I know it's a tricky atmosphere environment to start that now, but I think that would be amazing.
Absolutely. That's been something that has kind of been in discussion, and we're hoping that once we can get it started at Mount Abe, we can kind of spread out to the elementary schools. And like you said, I mean, with COVID, it's definitely more challenging, but yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And that's definitely something we're hoping to move forward with.
I'm just going to jump in. I first wanted to also echo what Shannon said and just thank you guys. It's great to be a part of this community that you're leading. And I really think you guys are leading us in this work. You know, you're sort of native to this in a way that we are not. And so I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to hear from you. I did wonder if there was any conversation about while you're waiting for a more durable flag to put back up the one you had before. I feel a sense of absence not having it there. And I just wondered if that was a conversation at all that you'd had.
Yeah, it can definitely go up whenever. We were just trying to follow a process and let you folks know that the flag was going to be going back up. So there wasn't questions about that, or when questions come up in the community, you'll be more poised to answer. So once the group is ready to put a flag back up, even if we're waiting for one, it turns out they're a little more difficult to find. We'll make sure that one is up as soon as the group is ready.
Rob?
Yeah, thank you, MASA and the student reps for sharing and all your work and your activism. And I would just continue to encourage you to, you know, it's one thing to fly a flag or put a sticker on a computer or a water bottle, and a whole other thing to actually put it into action. And so hearing about, you know, these discussions and your advisories, looking at where you could implement more anti-racist or curriculum, not only at the 9-12 level, but I'd say all the way down, like Sarah said, would be huge. And then I guess one question I do have is I did read the article that was in the Addison Independent a while back regarding this, and I believe that Shannon at one point mentioned that there were students that either stopped coming to school because of this issue, or maybe COVID also. But I believe it was around the idea that some students just stopped coming to school because the flag was raised. Has MASA or the community council reached out to those students to engage in more of a conversation? If you have, I'd love to hear how that went. And if you haven't, have you guys considered that? It would be an incredible example if you have, for, I guess, all the adults in the room, if you will, not only on the school board, but big picture too. How do you engage with folks that may have different opinions than you?
Yeah, I'm sure Shannon will address this, but MASA and regular students like us, we weren't, their identities weren't disclosed. So I guess other than just reaching out to the larger student body to try to do that general education, there wasn't a more individualized approach on our end.
Yeah, it's a tricky balance where student privacy laws come into place when kids choose to or their families choose to not send them to school or to have them not participate in the advisory in the circles and the process. I think one of the things that we talked about in community council and as a faculty is that this is the work right now, the anti-racism and kind of breaking down the inequalities and the inequities that are in schools. That is the work. I've not received a leadership magazine or publication, and I don't know how many months where there isn't, where if it's not on the front page, there's not a substantial article that this is the work for public schools across the country. And it's not just in advisory. As the girls talked about, that there are going to be changes within our curriculum as well to be more inclusive and aware. So we've really been using a more universal approach with kids, and there are the process of the advisory circles where kids are asked to be present in the circle, but they can pass. They don't have to participate, but they can listen. And I do know that some of the kids that opted out for a while, they came back, and we still have circles. The work still goes on, maybe just not as intensive as it was before the flag was flown for the first time. And some of those kids paid closer attention. So it's this balance of how much do you push or how much do you just kind of keep exposing and just have it be a really iterative process so that everybody can access it when they're ready. And that is part of the journey when you are on a journey to become anti-racist and to learn more about it and to be more self-aware. Your journey, your pace is very different than everybody else's, and you can't push your personal beliefs and agenda on anybody else. People have to be ready and willing. So we continue to expose, we continue to have the resources and to teach kids the skills to have the conversation when they don't agree with something. And if they have a different viewpoint, how do you have that conversation respectfully? It's okay for you to have a different viewpoint, but how do you do it in a respectful way where you can have that discourse and walk away and still be friends and still be classmates and not have it kind of just blow up and become a big thing, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So it's hard work. It's difficult. Those are hard conversations with students and families. And that's part of it. And we know that we just have to keep plugging away and coming back around to it and coming back around to it. And slowly but surely we'll get there.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us. Getting thumbs up. I hope you can see them. Thank you.
What a great way to start our meeting.
Yes.
Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks for your time, everyone.
Our next item is another communication and support to the board. Beeman as central office. Patrick?
Yeah, just so the conversation obviously has come up a couple of times about moving central office, and Beeman has been identified as a site where that might happen. So I just wanted to keep the board informed that we're starting to look at that more closely now to see what it would take and the upfitting and all that that process, which of course takes quite some time to really launch and get in depth in. But wanted to let you know we've reached out to an architect working with Truex Collins to start to explore that, and don't really have much more detail than that at this point, other than to say we're looking at the possibility of relocating central offices into Beeman in a situation like the repurposing that I recommended, but also in the event that a repurposing doesn't happen and Beaman still operates as a K6 building, what it could look like in that environment. Just trying to be prepared depending on what decisions are made, to be positioned to move out of our current lease and move into a school building. And right now still focusing on Beaman as that potential location. I will also say that, so the lease on central office is up in October. And, as we're looking at the process for upfitting and things of that nature, and in light of the decision timeline that we have, I have reached out to the landlord here to explore the potential of a 1-year extension to buy some time to have a little bit greater confidence in what our long-range planning may be, but also B, to better position us to get competitive rates on any upfitting expenses that we might see. When you put yourself in a position to have to force contractors to rearrange their schedule to fit in what you're trying to do and the timeline you're trying to do it in, you typically pay a premium for that. And a 1-year extension may help avoid those additional costs, and may the savings by extending our time may be equal to or even greater than what 1 year's lease might be in an extension. So those are some of the things that are in the works right now that I wanted to just bring you up to speed on, and we'll keep you updated as things develop further.
Patrick, could you just remind us what the savings to the district is by moving out of the current central office into one of our buildings?
Sure. So our lease right now, and Floyd may be able to pull up the more specifics, but we're somewhere in the ballpark of $70,000 annually, triple net. And effectively, if we're moving into a building that we're already heating, already paying electricity on, et cetera, the bulk of that 70,000 would be realized as savings.
Okay.
What does triple net mean? Oh, sorry.
Right, go ahead, Krista.
I just didn't know what triple net meant.
I can let Floyd elaborate, but basically it's sort of all of the costs associated. It's the rent, it's the heat, it's the electricity, et cetera.
Taxes, all those pieces are pushed over to the renter or the leaseholder. So.
Sort of all related costs to be in this space.
So Floyd, do you have a total of what the rent is with those added back in?
I sure do. Our number for fiscal year 21 is $70,221 in that budget. Our actual previous year was $67,419. We're projecting $71,625 for next year.
Okay, now I'm really confused. The net 70,000, don't you have to add heat, electric bill, and any other associated costs?
I think that includes it.
Back into the 70, add it to the 70 to get a total figure. Net means it doesn't include those things, right?
The $70,000 figure is rolled up with the triple net included.
Rob?
So, Patrick, I hear you right. You're looking at this, if Beaman were to operate continually as a K through 6 school, there's still the space to move in if your plan doesn't become approved.
Yep. Yeah, that's the thinking right now with the number of classrooms at Beaman, which aren't projected to need to increase, given enrollment projections, et cetera. If central office space occupied one of the 3 floors at Beaman, that leaves 2 floors still for classroom purposes, et cetera. And again, we're looking at it even more closely in that scenario, but the early projection is that yes, there'd be sufficient space. In fact, the square footage of a single floor at Beaman is considerably more than the square footage we occupy currently in our central office location. So So yeah, we're feeling pretty confident that the square footage works. And a lot of what we're trying to work through is what's the flow of the building like, giving priority to the academic components to the flow, making sure that the flow of the kids' day is priority number one.
Okay. All right, I'll keep moving along. Next is the update on the financial report, and that was linked in the packet. Are there any questions? Andrew?
I was just curious, just because I was curious about the COVID-related expenditures. Just didn't know what was lumped into that category.
We lumped in anything that was COVID related that we felt that there was reimbursable opportunity either through the CRF funds, the food service funds, or going forward, the ESSER funds. So the expectation is those are allowable costs that we will see reimbursement for. And there was a question a few months ago to break that out and to show what that number was.
Andrew, what page was that on, just for members if they're looking for it?
It's on the front page, the operating statement at the bottom of the expenditures.
Yeah, it was code 1900. So that's basically, it's a catch-all for anything that's above and beyond normal operating expenses related to COVID-19. And then that's from there, you seek reimbursement from the state and then it gets moved.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? Okay. Okay, well, the next is an update on the final budget presentation.
Sure, I can start sharing my screen and kind of walk through a very similar presentation to what you saw a couple of days ago. A couple of changes, and I'll highlight what those changes are. And then we can take any questions. Okay, so same assumptions behind the figures you saw the other day. We were really holding out in the hopes that we would get a new equalized pupil figure today. That did not happen. So the last documented equalized pupil figure we received shows us having 7.98 fewer. We believe what will actually come through is closer to the 3 fewer equalized pupil, which is a figure we were using a couple of presentations ago. But unfortunately, we haven't gotten that in writing, so we're feeling compelled to go with the last sort of piece of evidence we can lean on for that. Still assuming the same fund balance of 966, same increase to the spending threshold. There's a couple of revenue changes that we can talk about, and still using the same healthcare premium increase that we talked about. Likewise, using the similar assumptions behind the projections for FY23. Same assumptions behind best case and worst case. You're going to see these figures have changed slightly because we've updated FY22's projections a little bit, and that had an impact on what we project for FY23.
Can I ask a question now or later?
I guess now is fine, sure.
So if we do get the 3 fewer EQs, then instead of the 7.9 or whatever it is on your screen, that's going to free up some revenue. Would your plans be to reduce the 366?
So here's the trick. What the board adopts tonight as its budget sets our spending pretty much in stone in terms of what goes before the voters. And because you also tonight adopt a warning and a ballot, which speaks to our cost per pupil and what % increase in the cost per pupil, we can't change those after tonight, even though we expect we're going to see a different equalized pupil count in the coming days. This is not unprecedented. There is history of getting updated equalized pupil count figures after a board has adopted a budget. So that's unfortunate, and it's our reality. In fact, the reason we moved board meetings toward the end of the month a couple of years ago was to try and give us as much time as we could to have the best information at hand when the board needed to adopt a budget. And even with that move, it's still not quite enough time to get the information that we wish we could have. And unfortunately, our window of time is almost closed already to be able to warn or to post the warning and the budget and all those things for the town meeting day vote. We'll talk momentarily about a yield change as well, which is pretty significant, that we can speak to. But again, yield pretty consistently year over year moves after a board has adopted a budget, and actually moves after a community has voted in support of a budget.
Thank you.
Continuing on. The recommendation really is still to put as much of the fund balance into a capital reserve fund as possible, making sure that we're staying somewhere in that 50,000 under the spending threshold. Reason still is because we have some significant facilities needs that we're anticipating. And perhaps equally important, if not more so, the less fund balance we apply to FY22 to offset taxes, the better position we are to make some use of fund balance in FY23 to help mitigate some of the challenges that we expect. There's been some question about whether the fund balance should go into the capital reserve or the education reserve. There are pros and cons to the two. I think we could talk about that. But I think as much as this board would be comfortable placing into one of our reserve accounts, the better position we are for FY23. And so when we look at the figures here, so there's a slight uptick in the overall expenses for FY22. The expenses are, there was an increase in expenses of 38,000, and that's a move to bring in our spring musical. So both our spring and fall musicals have in the past operated somewhat independent of Mount Abe as a school. We think the spring and the fall musicals bring tremendous value to our community, and they really belong under the umbrella of MAUSD and not separate. So we want to reflect the expenses associated with those events. And there's also a subsequent increase in revenue of 38,000 to offset dollar for dollar the added expense. So the ticket sales, et cetera, cover a lot of those costs. So there's an increase in expense, and there's a dollar for dollar increase in the revenue as well. So the net effect is zero. There is another correction. This came up in our last meeting. We corrected the sort of default 2% increase on the long-term debt to reflect the actual projected long-term debt. And that had a benefit for us to reducing the spending by about $5,000. So the net, which you see in the education spending, is actually about $5,000 less than what you had seen before. And when we take $5,000 less in education spending and divide that amongst the same number of equalized pupils, our cost per equalized pupil goes down a little bit. In this case, it goes down by $3.69 from what you saw on Thursday. So what was about $45,000 under the spending threshold on Thursday now is about $53,000 under the spending threshold. So we're well within the recommendation in terms of dollars under the spending threshold. And I can pause there to take any questions that you might have. And again, as I mentioned before, FY23 is adjusted slightly as well because it's based on what was our previous FY22 projections.
Patrick, could you explain the two numbers in the FY22 and the FY23 columns, the bottom box? You have plus 33.47, and then you have a plus 33 in parentheses, which usually means a minus. So I don't know if you could explain those two, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So what that's showing is this 18,752.59 is $33.47 greater than what our cost per equalized pupil was in this current year in FY21. This figure represents how many total dollars our budget is over or under, in this case, under that spending threshold.
Thank you.
Andrew had his hand up.
It was a few slides back, Patrick, but I guess this is as good a place as any to ask. So one of the things I am gathering from the community is that some people feel like the cost of healthcare is sort of a huge factor in this conversation we're having. So the annual budget, but the repurposing or what to do with declining enrollment. So I see you're estimating 9.9%. Do you or Floyd have at your fingertips what that actually means in real dollars for the budget?
I do not. I'm not sure how quickly Floyd thinks he might be able to pull that up.
Andrew, to help me to answer that question, are you thinking the year-over-year increase or what the total amount for medical insurance we pay?
I'm interested in what the 10% increase is for this coming fiscal year. So what is just that 10% increase?
Maybe we can continue on a little bit and give Floyd a chance to drum that up, unless you have it right at your fingertips, Floyd.
Not quite.
Okay.
Right.
Floyd, while you're looking for that, this is Steve. Once you have that number, I'd be curious what that represents. What that represents in terms of a percentage increase to our salaries and benefits category.
So Steve, would that question be if we applied, let's say that 10% equals 300,000. If we had put 300,000 more into the salaries line, what percent does that 300,000 represent?
Yeah, it's tough. I'm just trying to figure out, for instance, what number would somebody try to apply to the spending threshold locally for us to increase the spending threshold to accommodate that number that Andrew's looking for. It's tough because you got to kind of, it's a much smaller percentage of the bigger picture than it is of just the healthcare number. And that's one question that I did have actually was, what does that represent in terms of an increase to the spending threshold if we were going to pretend we could ask for that?
Maybe when Floyd gets the figure, we can work from there to answer Andrew's and then your follow-up, Steve, if that works. I think.
And I'm not expecting that answer tonight, actually. That's just
okay.
And then Rob has his hand up.
Yeah, Floyd, if you don't expect the answer tonight either, but for me, it'd help to see, like, again, back to health insurance, what that looks like, our spending per equalized pupil. So of that 18K, I don't have the number in front of me right now, how much of that is actually going towards, healthcare and associated expenditures? Thank you very much.
All right. I'm not sure how much time we're trying to buy you anymore, Floyd, but I'll keep going and let us know when you have some information that might address some of the questions. All right.
I have a quick question to give Floyd some more time.
So it was easy for me to give you a total projected health insurance expenditure for next year. This is just the Mount Abe side of it, meaning that some of our teammates pay a portion as well. But the Mount Abe portion is $3.619 million. That works out to about 2,484 per student, and Rob. In terms of what that increase is, I don't have a simple way to just punch that up in this spreadsheet, but to do it working backwards, you're looking at around $370,000 of an increase. Probably well, it'll be greater than that because it's an increase on the total dollars, both employer and employee portion.
So Floyd, just if I heard you correctly, you said $2,484 per equalized pupil is basically their allotted portion of healthcare.
I'll say it back this way. For each one of our students at 1457.21, each one of those students is effectively paying $2,484 a year for the medical insurance at Mount Abe.
Okay.
Bear in mind that doesn't include the HRA funding as well because we use a higher deductible plan.
Okay.
There are a lot of components to this, and to truly break it out the way the questions are coming right now, not a difficult exercise, but one that would take more than the 10 or 15 minutes that you'd want to allocate for it while you sat there and watched me manipulate a spreadsheet.
Well, I mean, I think this just gives me the general understanding instead of percentage that in whole dollars, I think what I'm hearing from people is that they think it has a larger influence on the budget than maybe it really does. Although it is a significant portion of our budget, it sounds like it's like 10%, $3 million out of a $30 million budget, and then $2,400 per equalized pupil. And so, like, if healthcare wasn't included, what I'm hearing is probably in a couple of years we would still be up against the spending threshold anyway. We have other issues besides healthcare being a cost driver.
I would agree with that. And to your point, there was some information out and about that I heard secondhand saying that 80% of our budget was health insurance.
Right.
And I'm not sure what they were trying to get at with that. I think the 75 to 80% of our total expenditure is staff, and health insurance would be one of those costs rolled up into staff. And that may be where that number came from.
Right. That's helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
Krista had a comment too. I don't know if she got it answered.
Yeah, I guess I just was wondering or assuming that the bulk of so I'm impressed with our ability to keep our spending at 1.13% in this budget. And can I assume that that is, primarily because we're not filling 9 positions, 8 of which are teaching positions?
Correct. Ready for more slides?
Can I just say one thing? I just wanted to, we got some extra people in the meeting to remind people that we no longer negotiate healthcare. That's done at the state level. And if that gets taken out of school taxes, it will go to taxes somewhere else. So I just wanted to, it would be good, but we have no control over that now at all. So just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Just to follow on to that, Kristen, though, there is legislation in the legislature to reconsider how that is negotiated. That would be worthwhile for people to weigh in on, particularly the House version.
All right, Patrick, I think you can try and go again.
All right. And I can't see anyone's face, Don, so if I'm missing someone who has a hand up or something, feel free to continue to help me catch them.
Okay, I'm gonna just keep scrolling through and looking for them.
Yeah. So this is the updated best case, projected, and worst case for FY23, given the updated FY22. You know, the big picture story hasn't really changed. You know, we're under now, you know, close under $250,000 in a best case scenario, still approaching 4 million in a worst case, and still just over 2 million in the projected for FY23 in terms of being over the spending threshold. So slight adjustments, but no real change to the story for FY23. And here's another look at the budget development over time. That brings us to where we are today, with those figures showing us under the spending threshold by a little over 53,000. In terms of what that does to folks who pay taxes based on income, and again, this is using the most available median income for Addison County. You can see here, and we'll still talk, it's coming in a couple of slides. We'll talk about some new information that was released today about potential change to the yield, which is quite significant. And that's not reflected here. Then this looks similar to what you saw last time, using the updated CLAs. And here's what it kind of boils down to on a dollar impact per 100,000 of assessed value for the 1/3 of folks who pay property taxes based on their property's value. Again, slight changes there. I think what is most important to know, though it's not confirmed yet, is there's some new information about the yield. A much more favorable yield is now projected in light of increased revenue into the ed fund from taxes, or from consumable taxes, and that has a positive effect for us. I'll get down to sort of the dollar impact because it's significant. If I go back up one slide for just a minute, if we take the Bristol example being on the top line there, with the previous information that came out about the yield and this budget in Bristol, the change per 100,000 of assessed value is projected to be an increase of $143.89. The only change being the new yield figure that was spoken to today, but not anything official yet, brings that 143 down to 63.89. So it's an $80 to $90 impact to the good per town. In Lincoln, which has that CLA over 100%, if the yield that is currently projected to actually be acted on is acted on, that would actually be a reduction in taxes from education property taxes for the town of Lincoln, with the same budget that you've seen tonight.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you so much for doing the income piece first, since most of our taxpayers pay that way. If I remember correctly, with the original yield figures on a median income, that's a $78, there it is, a $78 increase.
Yes.
Is there a new yield for income?
I don't know that we've calculated that. We were kind of scrambling to pull this off today just with that new information. Floyd, I'll give you a chance to let us all know if there is something that you have that you can share related to that.
We didn't chase into that deep enough. The income yield per equalized pupil number that was sent out is actually a lower number. And we haven't plugged that in to determine what that might impact.
So it'll be more than 78 bucks.
Well, there may be an inverse relation there that would be advantageous, but unlikely it would be more than.
Okay, thanks.
Kristen Blanchett.
Oh, I don't think I had my hand up. Sorry.
And I can stop screen sharing now and I'll be able to see folks.
I was just going to say that for those folks new to the board, that I think this is probably the easiest budget we've had to look at since unification in the new board, because I think we've gone out with some much bigger numbers before and a lot of staffing cuts to real people, not just positions. So this feels good, at least for once, in light of other conversations, that the budget is fairly straightforward.
Steve. You're muted. Steve, you're still muted.
Patrick, I just wanted to touch base on the 2 emails that we bounced around today. The option to put the reserve money into the education reserve versus the capital reserve, just in that we would be able to, as a board, move it to skip 22 and apply it to 23. And that would soften the blow in 23. It would potentially make 24 a little harder to chew. But at that point, we could maybe lump that money in with maybe some other savings we could identify to get to that magic 2.5 number that you're showing right now as a deficit for 23, and buy ourselves a year to kind of see where a lot of these moving targets are going for our long-term planning.
Yeah, Floyd and I had a chance to connect briefly on that since our exchange, and I've also pulled up the article that created that education reserve fund.
Yeah.
Because the language of the article can become pretty critical in knowing what you can and can't do with those funds. So again, so the current recommendation, and there are pros and cons to going either way. So I'm not strongly opposed to an alternative here, but the current recommendation is to still put the reserve, the education reserve that we have into the capital reserve fund in light of the significant need for some big ticket items, namely the roof at Mount Abe and the main electrical feed at Mount Abe. However, there are advantages to putting the funds, and I would say at least the same amount that I'm recommending that went into the capital reserve fund, into the education reserve fund. So to clarify, there are these 2 reserve funds. One is capital. They can really only be used for improvements to facilities, and the electorate has to vote to authorize that. Usually how that has gone is there's a special meeting to talk about the project that needs to get done. The electorate in attendance votes from the floor to approve or not approve the spending of that money for that particular project or projects. The other fund is an education reserve fund, and I'll read to you the article that was approved that created this fund and put some money in it, because I think it's informational in terms of what authority the board has with this and what ways it can be spent. So the article read, shall the legal voters of the Mount Abraham Unified School District authorize the school board of directors to establish an education reserve fund to be initially funded with $250,000 of the district's audited fund balance existing on June 30, 2019. That $250,000 is the current balance in that fund. So that's the amount that's there now. The audited fund balance as of June 30, 2019 was $750,705, with the school directors having the discretion to allocate such funds to anticipated/unanticipated expenditures, such as maintenance, student needs, or general budgetary expenditures. So I believe that that article gives a great deal of latitude to the board in determining how to spend these funds that are in the Education Reserve Fund. It is clear that it can't be used for capital expenses. So the capital fund can only be used for capital expenses and can't be used for other expenses. The Ed Reserve Fund can be used for other expenses, but can't be used for capital. That's the piece that gets a little bit tricky to navigate given potentially competing needs from facilities and programming. So I think that informs the conversation that you were raising via email today, Steve.
Yeah, so the thought would be that we would take that $600,000 added to that reserve fund. We'd have now, you know, 850 in that pocket. And if we have a $2.5 million shortfall showing up in 23, that maybe with, you know, one of Dave's suggestions to combine students or some other things that you might find to save money, or potentially putting the roof on hold if it looks like it can live another year or two, or if the electrical, you know, it's been this bad this long and it lasts another year. And really it's just kind of a stopgap measure to get us to the end of 23 and see where all these other moving parts from Montpelier are going, what COVID is doing, you know, allow some other ideas, some more time to be vetted if we have to. It's just kind of a stopgap measure to push the, you know, as Patrick said, maybe kick the can down the road a year, which I think people have been looking for, without necessarily having to come up with the entire 2.5 out of staff. So it was just an idea that I thought I should float out there to see what people thought about it.
And for what it's worth, as we're considering this idea, I asked Floyd to run some figures on if the board used even less than the 366,000 to offset taxes, and meaning if the board wanted to put even more of that fund balance into either one of the reserve accounts, what that impact would be. So I have that information if that's something somebody wanted to entertain.
Can I ask, so you use the word maintenance as an authorized use of the education reserve fund. So like the shower rooms could have been classified as maintenance, right?
Well, I think that's where it gets to be tricky. I think we'd be hard pressed for a $1.2 million project to be considered maintenance. To me, that's probably a capital improvement. And where it shifts from a capital improvement to a maintenance project is a pretty gray area. We'd want to try to get some clarity on.
So if we were to go ahead and even reduce the fund balance for this year, you were noting that it might not, you know, we'd probably be exceeding the threshold, but it wouldn't necessarily represent a very large increase or a very large penalty.
Yeah, so what that would be, if we go to the sort of extreme, if the board applied $0 from the projected fund balance to offset taxes, we would be over the spending threshold by $313,000. And that would be, instead of what is currently a 0.18% increase in the cost per pupil, it would be a 1.52% increase in the cost per pupil, which, as Andrew mentioned before, is still lower than several other percent increases in cost per equalized pupil that we've experienced in the past. And with this more favorable yield coming out, it probably brings, and Floyd may have something more precise, it brings the dollar impact back up to and just over probably where we were projecting to be before today. when we got the new anticipated yield information. Floyd, I don't know if you have something more precise on the tax impact. You're muted if you're.
I think I can. Let me just pull it up.
Okay. So there, I guess the short answer there is there is an opportunity to still have what could be considered a reasonable budget to put forward and not apply any fund balance. The kicker is we would be paying $313,000 in penalty.
Yeah, which seems pretty steep just for that exercise.
Yep.
And it might be a maneuver we could, I mean, we might want to pull that maneuver in 22 rather than now. You know, if we found that we were running a bit short on where we thought we were going to be on that $2.5 million pot, that might be a last ditch maneuver, but I don't know if we would want to go that route right now.
Yep.
Krista has her hand up.
Yeah, I'm just trying to catch up a little bit in terms of what you're proposing, Steve. And so if I hear you correctly, are you saying you're proposing or interested in knowing what it would be like to put the entirety of the fund balance minus the 366 to offset taxes, that remaining balance into the ed fund instead of the capital reserve fund? Is that what we're kind of the bottom line?
I was thinking it might be good to hold it in reserve and actually apply it to 23 rather than applying.
But hold it there and not capital where it's tied up into.
Right, because it's hard construction and the voters have to vote on it. And if it's education, then, you know, we're trying to retain teachers. What can
right.
We do? So.
And can I just ask a follow-up question then, Patrick? Can you just remind us of what the balance is in the capital reserve fund right now?
So the capital reserve currently has 600,000 and the ed reserve has 250. So 2 years ago, we created and funded the capital reserve with 600,000. Last year, we created and funded the ed reserve with 250. We did that initially in the ed reserve because we weren't really sure how things were going to actually work out with the HRA changes. So we wanted to have that backup plan in case the projections were way off. They ended up not being way off, which was great. So that money is still there. But that's sort of the history. So each of those two accounts has only had 1 year of contribution to them, and that's why they have those dollars.
And do you know how loudly the clock is ticking on the Mount Abe roof and the electrical system?
It's in process right now. I think we were waiting for some weather to change to get the proper look at the roof, and I don't think we have that information right now. I know just sort of anecdotally, the message is on a windy day, you can see the roof membrane lift off the roof.
And we're pretty sure that would wipe out the capital reserve fund if we only have 600 in there.
In addition to the 600, we have the 1 million in the general fund. So
okay.
We have 1.6. So we could theoretically
do one.
Okay. And that's still, you know, really ballparking what the cost would be for a new roof. That's part of the work that's sort of in process, but still in the early stages to get a better number on what that would really be.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by Steve's idea. I do also recall ceiling tiles falling in on students at one point. But if we've got some money in there already in 2 different places, I'm intrigued by that idea.
And then we have Rob and then Kristen Blanchette.
And Patrick, how sure are you, like, is our equalized pupil count? I mean, it's at the 7.98, I believe, right? That's as of today. Could tomorrow it be at 3?
Yeah.
Possibly? And then how does that shift the numbers, I guess?
It doesn't, unfortunately.
It doesn't. Okay.
Because what you approve tonight as a board, you approve the budget, you adopt the warning, and you adopt the ballot. When that's done tonight, those are set in stone. That's what goes before the voters on town meeting day. And we're already getting into the later days of our 10-day window to get those posted per statute. So it's the unfortunate budget building process in education that sometimes we get the numbers that are really critical after the fact.
And then we have Kristen and then Dave.
Thanks, Patrick. The budget, and Floyd, the budget looks really reasonable, and I'm glad it looks like taxes will go up just a small amount in this very stressful and uncertain year for people. One thing I just wanted to ask you about was, I know that sometimes if there's strong feelings or issues in school districts, the citizens will vote down a school budget to show displeasure with something else, even if they're not displeased with the budget. And so I know we have a lot of energy. We've, paused and extended the time that we're going to problem solve the facilities issue. But my question is, what negative effects would the community voting down this budget have on students?
It's hard to know for sure exactly what that would be. Typically when a budget is voted down, the assumption is it's because people think the cost is too great for the return on that investment. And so it typically produces a reduction of a budget that gets put back out for another vote. That reduction can come in a few different ways, right? So the board could choose to put more of the fund balance toward taxes to reduce taxes and see if that appeases the voters, in which case in FY22, that wouldn't have a negative impact on students, but it would dig the hole of FY23 deeper that we have to find a way through. So there's concern there. Or we have to go back to find whatever amount of money the board thinks we need to find to satisfy the voters. And that's where we start running the risk of impacting students. Those dollars could come from facilities, from that $1 million, and that less directly impact students, I suppose. But when I think about the impact of what we've done with that money over the years, I feel like it's had a positive impact on students. So it may be more direct than we might think. Even though in particular, most notably the recent changes to the auditorium and the locker rooms, which are two places that can't really get used like they usually can right now, we haven't experienced that benefit, but we will soon, I'm optimistic. So if not from facilities, then we're digging into personnel, which impacts supports and programs.
Thank you. So I just had one quick statement, I guess, that again, I feel this is a reasonable budget, and that I would hope that if people have other issues with the board at this time, that they would vote, they would separate that from voting for this budget and voting for a good budget for the students of the district.
Okay, and then Dave.
So I agree with Kristen. It's a good budget and we should support it. But I do have some questions. So if we gain 5 equalized pupils from 3 to 7.98, is essentially a gain of 5 equalized pupils. I'm trying to work this through sitting here without a calculator and my brain is working overtime, but does that change the revenue for the district out of the education fund? Does it reduce our expenses? Does it certainly changes our relationship with the high spending threshold where because our per pupil costs will be lower. Can you help me understand that, Patrick?
Sure. So if it changes after the board has adopted a budget, then it doesn't change our spending at all. It really only changes our cost per equalized pupil, which has a direct impact on what the tax rate is. If we knew tonight that we were getting those 5 equalized pupils, we'd have $100,000 more to work with in this budget. That could be $100,000 more of the fund balance going into one of the reserve accounts and having no impact on the cost per pupil or the tax rate. Or it could be $100,000 more in expenses without changing the cost per equalized pupil or the tax rate. So that's the difference. If we knew, and again, we may legitimately find out tomorrow that we have these additional equalized pupils that gives us $100,000 more to work with. Unfortunately, I think literally the window to get everything warned and posted and everything in time is this week. So we're effectively out of time to make these decisions and get everything in place for a budget vote on town meeting day.
So it would change the tax rate, however, different from what you just showed us?
I think it would, yeah. So everything that we show in terms of tax rates and even I think if we read so the sentence that speaks to the budget says it is estimated that this budget amount, if approved, will result in education spending of X per equalized pupil, which is X higher than spending for the current year. So it's clear that it's an estimate and that those figures can change when they're actually calculating the tax rate. So yes, I think it is true that more equalized pupils after you adopt this budget would have a positive impact on the tax rate. And it would be different from what people see on the ballot.
And
what would not be different, and this is the important piece, what effectively you as a board are voting to adopt tonight is a total dollar spending. What voters vote on at the polls is a total dollar spending, period. And that doesn't change. So that 31, whatever the figure was, that becomes static tonight once you've adopted it, assuming you do. Into next year, like that is the figure we have to work with for spending. The other figures are still at play.
Thank you.
Krista, is your hand up from before, or do you have a new question?
No, sorry, I'll put it down.
I have a question regarding Steve's proposal. There hasn't been any discussion about prorating to both funds. I mean, we could sit right on the fence and put half and half, and I don't know if it makes sense to consider that as opposed to all or nothing.
Yep, that's certainly on the table.
It's a little tough just in that, I was looking at that $2.5 million shortfall in 23 and what do we do to come up with it? So the closer you could get to it now, it would seem to be the easier it would be to find those other pots on the way.
So what do we do to move that forward? Or see if folks are interested in moving that forward?
I could make a motion.
Can we just re-clarify exactly what Patrick's proposal versus what your motion would be, Steve?
So Patrick wants to put, currently in his slides, he's saying 600,000, the remaining 600,000, 366 would still go towards the reducing, or would go towards reducing taxes this year. And the remaining 600 would go into the capital reserve. My motion would simply be to put that money in the education reserve. The intent for that would be that we would hang on to it and use it to offset taxes in 23.
Knowing that it would be the downside is it's a one-time fix, right? So we'd be effectively buying some positions on the back of a reserve fund that we wouldn't anticipate being able to sustain going into the following year. So that's sort of the kick the can down the road concept that Steve referenced earlier. It does have the effect of buying time. It would do that. But in addition to kicking the can down the road, it potentially creates an even larger hole in FY24, which if buying the year, and this is, so what's the return on investment, right? We know the return on investment if you put a new roof on a building that needs a new roof. It's less clear what the return on investment is if we put money into an ed reserve fund and we buy positions to buy time. If we use that time well, and that time finds us a path that realizes the savings we need to, then that 600K in the ed reserve positions us to meet the even deeper hole we dug for ourselves in FY24. If we don't make decisions that realize those savings that we need to find, we just made FY24 that much harder on ourselves. So that's there's potential for return on investment, and there's potential for less return on investment, I guess.
I think it goes a little ways towards, addressing a lot of the concerns people have had about all this happening too fast, and that, there's too many uncertainties. And Montpelier's got 3 or 4 of the variables in their court this legislative session that we think we might see some clarity on by the end. And so at least you'd be able to see the cliff you were jumping over a little clearer. You could walk up to it instead of just driving the car off it. But as Patrick said, it's if we don't do good work and come up with the rest of the bucket, we're just going to have a deeper bucket to fill.
Krista, did you have another question?
Yeah, well, more of a comment. I guess what I'm more interested in is, because I would argue that, there are some folks that want to push the decision off, but I also think some folks are wary of just kicking down the can, I think is not, or whatever that expression is. I don't think that's something everybody wants to do. But what interests me about this idea is more that what we are really looking at in terms of a proposed timeline for action. I think what I heard you say, Patrick, is that it probably is not gonna, it would be hard to make it take effect before 23. So in other words, that it kind of faces that reality that we want to take action and we're limited on how fast that action can happen. So what can we do in the shorter term while we're committed to figuring out that plan? So I prefer not to think about it as kicking the can down the road, I guess is what I'm saying. Because I think for a lot of folks, that's not that appealing.
And Dave?
I like the way the budget was proposed by Patrick. I could go to a 50-50 proposal if that's the motion Steve wants to make.
So a 50-50 proposal would be just splitting the 600 between the two funds, or is that what you're thinking, Dave? So we would only reserve 300 for the education fund?
Yeah.
And that combined with the 250 that's there would give us a 550 pot.
And Sarah LaPearl.
Every fund we put it in, do we have to have a different vote on though? Is that what makes that tricky?
The education fund, we have direct control over, so we can vote ourselves how to use it.
That's not what I meant. I meant how, when the voters go to put the money into it, aren't we voting to put the money into it?
Yeah, so we'd probably add another article. So there's already an article drafted to put 600,000 in the capital reserve. We would amend that to put 300,000 in the capital reserve, and then use effectively the same language that we used to create the ed reserve, with a tweak, because we don't have to create it first. We're just depositing money into it. So there would be an article that does that as well. So I do believe I'd want to probably get legal counsel to make sure, but I think it would be 2 articles as opposed to 1 that puts money in both.
Thanks.
And Patrick, just for sort of yardstick sake, you're using kind of a round number of $90,000 per professional staff, benefits and salaries kind of included as an average.
Yes.
So, roughly for every $100,000 we put aside, that's a position. So it's not a big bang for your buck. But it's out of the 25 people you were thinking we might need to riff in 23, you know, there's a couple of folks.
Yep.
Are there any more questions around Patrick's budget presentation tonight? Just want to see if anybody who hasn't spoken has anything they need to ask. Okay, so then I need a little clarity on process. So our next item we're coming to is to approve the budget amount. So for that piece, I didn't hear anybody expressing a need to change that. So that will still be that $31 million, that piece. That would be the first piece. And then under the warning, is that where we would be specific about changing the language if we decide to for one of the reserve funds?
Yes, and then there'd be something similar for the ballot, and we would just obviously make the ballot reflect the warning.
Okay, all right. And Patrick, the language for the motion on the budget clearly has to reference education spending, that $31 million figure.
Yes, I wouldn't say education spending, because education spending is the net of total expenses and revenue.
Okay, so it's
Really,
adopt.
we're looking at total expenses.
Okay, so it's just adopt a budget and that bottom line number for 21, 22. So the first, the action needs to be to approve the Mount Abraham Unified School District to adopt a budget of that 31,753,310 for the school year 21, 22. And that's the extent of the motion for the first action. So, okay, so, all right. Just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Okay. All right, so I guess we'll continue to work through it as we go. So now we're moving on to action item under board management and governments to approve the budget for FY22.
So moved.
Is that Krista?
Yes.
Okay.
Second.
Sarah.
Okay, any discussion? Okay. All right. So all those in favor of approving the budget for FY22 in the amount of $31,753,310, please say aye. So I'm going to go through the list. Krista?
Aye.
Sarah McLean?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
Kristen?
Aye.
Dave?
Aye.
Kevin?
Aye.
Steve?
Aye.
Andrew?
Aye.
Liz?
Aye.
Okay. Sarah LaPearl?
Aye.
Okay. And Annie?
Aye.
All right. So that passed unanimously. Okay. All right, moving on to the next thing, to approve the warning. So the warning was sent. Did everybody get a chance to look at the warning? Steve, is this the place where you maybe want to make your motion?
Yeah, I just wanted to wait for anybody else that had any other issues with it before I brought that up.
Okay. Anyone? Andrew?
I'm just trying to understand. So the capital reserve requires a vote of the taxpayer if we want to use something out of that fund. And much more narrowly define what we can use that money for. So the educational reserve allows us to do perhaps improvements, capital improvements, but also support, no.
Education reserve
Repairs.
can't be spent on capital improvements. And
Im-
the gray area
improvements.
is how do we define capital improvement versus maintenance?
You can mow the lawn, but you can't put a roof on.
Right. And so I'm just trying to think about like the pros and cons of what Steve is saying versus like knowing that the particular, in particular Mount A with its significant infrastructure needs because of its age, is there a downside to this if we put too much in the education reserve and we need the money for capital?
I mean, that's the downside is not being able to afford to address an issue that we want to be able to address. Which again, if we are able to sustain the $1 million or the 1.1 million in the capital in the construction services line, in all likelihood, what we can't get done when we want to, maybe we can get done in the following year when we have those funds available again. So it's a bit of a gamble, though. My sense is a reasonable gamble. I don't think, the roof is perhaps the most pressing and concerning thing. We've got some leaky windows that we can address that are not going to be such a high dollar concern. And I think if push came to shove with what's currently in the capital reserve and what we have available to us in the general fund, we could probably put a roof on Mount Abe if that had to happen this summer. That's my sense, Floyd. I'd like to get your thoughts and make sure the board hears your thinking as well as you're living in this more on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I don't disagree. It would be possible. Would it be preferable? No. And there's another facet to this that you and I have talked about, Patrick, and that is if it's under the capital reserve fund, if the capital construction bill goes through, then that spending is beneficial to us versus the spending threshold going forward. So there's a small nuance there that may be beneficial to us, to Steve's point of coming into 23 with capital money available and being able to address threshold issues then.
But we also have the option to move fund balance around next year. And if we know for certain that that's going to be the case, we can actually do a bigger job of throwing money at the capital reserve next year.
Correct.
Kristen Blanchett.
It seems to me that almost every year we have some kind of a surprise that we need to spend money on. And I'm just concerned. And Floyd, can you explain again the disadvantage that you just described to doing it in the way that Steve proposes?
I don't see a huge disadvantage to putting it in there, except it excludes it from the benefit of capital funds as a carve out from the spending threshold restrictions that we're under.
I think we have to look into that though, because I'm not sure spending money out of the capital reserve fund benefits us there, because that's not in the general fund. I think the benefit, if the legislature takes the action we hope they do, is the 1.1 million this budget shows in construction services wouldn't count against our spending per pupil in terms of the threshold. It still counts as spending per pupil for tax purposes, but not in terms of paying a penalty.
Yeah, it's not counted towards our ed spending if it's in a reserve fund, right?
Correct.
Right.
Because we've already been taxed on that, and if we're going to pay a penalty, we've already paid the penalty on that. Like that's money we've already paid for, I guess, if that makes any sense.
So does that mean it would be harder to stay under this threshold next year, possibly?
I think possibly easier. If the legislature takes the action to exclude general fund dollars that are spent toward construction services or capital improvements, that puts us $1.1 million theoretically closer to being under the spending threshold. So, and I say potentially because the devil's in the details, right? So what's the tracking mechanism? How do they define it? What's the accounting practice that they feel would give them confidence that we didn't just say, oh yeah, we had $7 million in our construction services line, and now we have 7 million that doesn't count against our cost per pupil. There's going to have to be some accounting for those expenditures. And I think that maybe, frankly, that's my concern. Conceptually, my sense is there'd be agreement to the idea of not counting these dollars against the spending threshold. But I think the logistics of how do you police that could be what hangs that bill up.
So we would benefit that more from how it stands now or from Steve's proposal?
Makes no difference.
Yeah, they're kind of two different topics in a way. The reserve fund would only, the fund balance would only make it more difficult to stay under the threshold next year if we spent more than 366 to reduce taxes this year. So if we took the $366,000 number and made that larger and put less in the reserves, then it would make it harder to stay under the threshold next year because we wouldn't necessarily have that same revenue next year. But we're not really my proposal isn't to change Patrick's 366,000 to reduce taxes. It's just to reallocate what fund we put the reserve money in. So it's really just a question of whether we want to risk not having it for hard construction or whether we want to, soften the blow in 23 where we're looking at, maybe 25 RIFs and a $2.5 million shortfall.
And maybe that's a good way to put it, Steve, as you were just talking. It's sort of hedging your bets. Do you risk not having it to spend on capital improvements, or do you risk not having it to mitigate what looks like a pretty challenging FY23 budget?
Right. So if the idea of a 50-50 split has some merit.
I mean, yeah, that sounds a little more, because that building concerns me, particularly Mount Abe. It just feels like, as Kristen said, it's just one $500,000 or $500,000 or $1 million project, surprise. I don't know what it was when they had to replace the gym floor and the ceiling. I don't remember what happened there, but that was expensive too.
Yeah, I think that was in the 300,000 range, all said and done.
So I'm going to make a motion to amend the warning to add another article, to revise the capital reserve amount to $300,000 and to create a new article that places $300,000 of the fund balance in the education reserve.
Are you to revise the language on the warning and allocate $300,000 to the capital reserve fund and then create an additional article for $300,000 in the education reserve fund?
Correct.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second Andrew.
Andrew. Okay, further discussion, clarifications? Okay. All right, so the motion is to revise the warning.
Don, Kevin has a
Oh, sorry.
So So are we moving the warning, or are we just amending the warning?
Right now, amending the warning.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so in the motion to revise the warning and to have the funds deposited in the capital, $300,000 deposited into the capital reserve fund, and then create an additional article for $300,000 of the fund balance to be added to the education reserve fund. Please vote. So Krista?
I vote yes or approve.
Okay. Sarah McLean?
Approve.
Kristen Blanchett?
Yes.
Okay. Rob?
Yes.
Dave Sharp?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Okay. Steve?
Yes.
Caleb's absent. Andrew?
Yes.
Liz?
Yes.
Sarah?
Yes.
And Annie?
Yes.
Okay, so that passed. Okay. All right, and then now we can take up the approving the warning with the changes.
So moved.
Steve? Is there a second?
I'll second Andrew.
Andrew, okay. Any clarification on or questions around the warning, Kevin?
So I noticed in the warning and also in the flyer that I'm not sure there's an action on, but it talks about going to polling places, and there's limited to no discussion about absentee or absentee ballots or whatever the proper term is. And I don't know if we are creating confusion by not having that in the verbiage or not.
Yeah, it's a good question. We did, I think the revised flyer does make reference to if you request a mailed ballot from your town clerk, you'll get a school ballot as well. Trying to get out in front of that, but we don't mention anything in the warning. And I'm not sure what the proper approach there would be. I don't see any harm necessarily in a similar statement on the warning that says you can request a mailed ballot. I think the expectation is if you don't request a mailed ballot that you're showing up in person and you'll follow the distancing and group size limitations.
And that's, it's immaterial to me, but that's the concern, is if people all of a sudden think that the only way they can vote on the school budget is to show up in person as opposed to have it incorporated into the town's procedures for advanced ballot requests.
Rob?
Yeah, Kevin, thanks for bringing this up. That I was going to point that out too. I think it'd be great if, I mean, I don't know what the day is that I need to request a mail ballot by for town meeting day. And if as a school district, if we could get ahead of that and just put it on the warning and say, you know, if you want a mail ballot, you're going to have to request it. Obviously, you request it from different people depending on what town you're in, I'd assume. But I'd assume the date would be the same across the board. Question?
Could we, on the flyer, it says in that box on the bottom in red, if you request to have your town clerk mail you a ballot, the MAUSD ballot will be included. Could we edit that to make it more clear that, or maybe even in that section above that, you may vote either at these regular polling places or by mail. If you request to have your town clerk mail you a ballot, the MAUSD ballot will be included with the date, must request by, just to make it a little more clear on the flyer.
I'm amenable to amending my motion if somebody wants to state that clearly.
And I actually have another question as well. So all along through all the COVID stuff, we've been saying like no visitors to the school. So how do we handle with them in the Robinson Elementary School?
There's exception to the guidelines for voting specifically.
Okay. Now, in the past, Patrick, we've had a very set sort of template for these that we could add or remove stuff. I remember in past years wanting to add stuff in it, having to have board council look at it because there were just some things we couldn't do because of some other rules already in place.
Yeah, that's my question about what latitude we have with the warning.
Right.
For sure, there's some statutory requirements around language that goes on a ballot for an article. But there may be some latitude for language on a warning that's outside of an article. So I think that I think Krista made a point about clarifying the language on the flyer. And then if we have the latitude, we could borrow that language and put it into the warning someplace. That may be the approach so that we know at least it's going to be out there in the flyer. And if we're allowed, it can be on the warning. And Krista, if you could send me that language or if it gets embedded in a motion here so we can capture it. I think you're onto something, but I wasn't able to quite capture it. That would be helpful.
Yeah, let me just, so in the flyer that was sent out it looks like it's the bottom of the second page. It talks about where to vote.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my motion would be to include on the flyer or to include language about voting by mail in addition, by mail or at your regular polling place, period, if you request to vote by mail, make a request to your town clerk by such and such a date. And I guess we just need to know what that date is.
And we're assuming it's the same date for all 5 towns.
Yeah.
Maybe hoping. I don't know if we're assuming
Hoping.
Or somewhere between the
Hoping. Is that enough clarity to rework the?
Well, I think we want to keep the amendment sort of generic and let you guys work it out. So
yeah, exactly.
Amend the motion to include instructions on how voters might to point out that voters can vote by mail as the superintendent finds appropriate with discussions with council.
I think I can work with that.
So the motion now has been sort of friendly amended to include language around voting by mail or at a polling place after clarification from board council. Okay. Rob?
So we have a little more latitude with the flyer. Am I correct in saying that, or we don't?
Yes.
100% latitude with the flyer. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can do
Okay,
what we
great.
want.
Yeah. Just so we can help people as best as possible so they understand how they can vote safely.
Okay.
We need a second.
That's the gist of what I'm taking away is let's let people know you can vote by mail. And if you want to do that, here's how you do it. And here's by when. Otherwise, the expectation is that you're choosing to show up to a poll and follow the guidelines.
Steve, did you say something?
Yeah, I just need a second on the amendment.
I'll second. Sarah.
Okay. Okay. Any more questions about the amendment? Okay, so let's vote on just the amendment piece to include language about voting by mail and how and when or at a polling place. And Patrick will reach out to make sure that it's all legal. Okay, so Krista?
Yes.
Yes, all right. Sarah McLean?
Yes.
Okay. Kristen Blanchett?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Andrew?
Yes.
Liz?
Yes.
Sarah?
Yes.
And Annie?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now that it's been amended, do you need to talk about it anymore, about approving the warning with changes?
For what it's worth, I did make a note that this conversation happened around the 8 o'clock mark in the video, so we can go back and see what we pick up from the conversation. Make sure we get it right.
All right. Does anyone oppose the motion to approve the warning with changes? Put your virtual hand up or put your real hand up. Okay, I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to say that everyone is in favor of approving the warning with the changes. I'm sorry, what? I didn't hear you, Chris.
That was a temporary unmuted situation that I think has resolved itself. I don't think it was Chris.
Okay, I didn't hear what she said. She said it so fast.
Yeah, it wasn't me.
You still missed it.
It wasn't me.
It wasn't Chris.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay. All right.
I have a question about the flyer.
Sure.
So Patrick, you mentioned an updated flyer. The flyer I see has the tax rates for before the changes that we made tonight. So in Bristol, a change per $100,000 of assessed value of $143.89. You did speak of an updated flyer. Is there one that's more updated than this one?
So no, this is the most updated one, but what you're seeing reflects the last published yield figure.
Right.
What we talked about tonight was an anticipated announcement of a new figure that just came out today. It's nothing official yet. We have a little bit more latitude about when we get this flyer out, so we can try to hold off to have something more firm to make some changes in terms of the tax rate. It would be, if there is going to be a new yield and that becomes a done deal, we would love to be able to put the new tax impact on this flyer when we send this out, as opposed to putting this flyer out and then 2 days later having a yield change and everything we sent doesn't make sense. It becomes a timing issue because ideally we put the warning out and this flyer at the same time. The warning by statute, we have to get out by the end of this week, and we are likely not to have a new official yield by the end of the week. So it gets a little tricky, but that's, I guess, the best response I can give you to the update on the tax rates.
Yeah, I doubt you'll have an official yield before, I don't know, a month or two from now.
And some of it may be, as we talk with our colleagues in other regions to see what's the common practice around the state. Are people running with this anticipated new yield since they're all projections anyway? Or are people going with the last thing they saw in writing from the tax commissioner's letter? So we haven't had a chance today to kind of check the pulse of the region on that, but we'll be able to in the next couple of days.
Thank you. I would very much appreciate it if there was a block that indicated tax rates for those who pay by income. The majority of our citizens pay by income. And if you had a box similar to the one that was in your budget presentation regarding what the tax rates would be by income, that would be helpful.
Additionally, there's another article that we talked about adding that may want some explanation as well. So that being the Education Reserve Fund that we're looking to deposit dollars into. So we have some squeezing to do of some of these boxes to get all of this in, but we'll work with it.
Okay. Any other questions about the flyer while we're on it? Okay. So our next item is to approve the ballot. And since we made changes to the warnings, it would be to approve the ballot to match the warning.
So moved.
Dave?
I'll second, Andrew.
Andrew? Okay. Any discussion? Okay. Is anyone opposed to approving the ballot with so it matches the warning for the FY22 voting? Any opposition? Okay, and I'm going to note that everyone is in favor. And the motion carries. Okay. Next item is to set tuition rates, and that also was sent under separate cover.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add here except to say that, and I know this will come as a complete surprise and shock. There's somewhat of a complicated, cumbersome process around setting tuition rates. Floyd can talk a little bit more about it, but the actual tuition rate is typically established at the end of a school year when it can actually be calculated at the state level what our tuition rate was. So let's say a student from out of district or a student who is in a sending district. Buell's Gore, I think, comes to mind as a town that doesn't operate a school. So they tuition kids to various places. If we have a student attending Mount Abraham from Buell's Gore, that town pays tuition on behalf of that student to Mount Abraham. And that actual tuition rate that the town pays, I believe, and Floyd can confirm, is determined at the end of that year that the student attended so that it can reflect the actual expenses. So we have to somewhat temporarily set tuition rates, knowing that they get adjusted to reflect actuals at the end of that year. And so part of what we're doing here, so we had to submit, according to a deadline from the state, we had to submit the document that was shared with you earlier today to be in compliance. And then we have to, you as a board have to officially act to set a tuition rate that then actually, I believe, gets adjusted. Did I kind of get that, Floyd?
Pretty close. You know, what the board sets as the tuition rate would be in the Buell's Gore example. The Gore would pay that amount for those students, and then it trues up at the end based on the number that the state gives us, not that the board generates or not that we generate. And the plus minus on that is either we send them a check for a small amount, they send us a check for a small amount. If it's within 3%, there is no check. And the process to determine a tuition is huge. It's hours of work for multiple levels of staff. And it's not going to be right at the end of the year anyway, and there's going to be an adjustment. So whether it's an adjustment of $300 or $387 to burn 30 or 20 hours of staff time, there's no return on that.
I move it forward.
I'll second, Andrew.
Any other questions? Okay. I'm going to ask the negative. So is anyone opposed to the motion to set the tuition rates for FY22 based on the document we received? Is there anybody opposed to that? Okay. All in favor and that it passed unanimously. Okay, next item is to approve the financial management questionnaire and authorize the chair to sign the document.
Don, I have a question. Do we need a motion first?
Yes.
Okay, I'll move.
I'll second.
Andrew, okay, sure. Now, Sarah, go ahead with your question.
So one of the questions was if the school board members attend financial trainings, and we don't, and I think that we should.
Okay. Okay. And
We have in the past had some opportunities. I can remember Emily Simmons, I think, has come from when she was, I think she's still with the AOE, but she came and spoke to our board about budget building, and we've had some of that a bit at the retreat, but I don't think we have in this most recent year. And I think also every meeting is financial training to some extent.
And Steve has his hand up. I think you're muted. Steve.
I've seen this for a couple of years, and I just saw the one over at the Career Center. And one thing that always makes me scratch my head about them is that I don't know if a yes answer or a no answer is good or bad, and I don't know what the recommendation is for either one of them. Like, there could probably be a whole instruction sheet that went with this to say, if you're saying that your board is answering, your financial department is answering no to this question, your next question should be, why not? Or how come? Or that's not best practice. So it seems like it's a tool that the state is looking for. Maybe it has to go back to the state and they know the answer to all these things, but it's a little difficult as a board member to understand sometimes whether these things are good or bad or indifferent, or if there's some follow-up that should be asked about them.
And a way I think about it, and Floyd, let me know if this is how you see it too. So we have this financial management questionnaire, which we complete internally, and it's sort of an internal check. And in addition to this, we have, and we put a lot more stock in this other thing. We have an external check, which is our audit that happens every year. And the auditors tell us, these are things that we notice that need improvement, and we want you to fix those things, and we work on those. So we have both the internal and the external check on our financial sort of practices. And this is a required step.
Yeah, I'm just curious if there's a, this is a state generated questionnaire, or does it come from the AOE or the Department of Taxes?
Secretary of Administration, I think.
I'm just wondering if they have some kind of a white paper that goes with it or anything.
I'll chase that down.
So I had just wondered a clarification on what Sarah said about the financial training piece. Or I guess it's to everybody, has anyone taken any of the VSBA webinars or classes that they offer around budget building and any of that? Has anyone done that? Oh, Liz has. Okay. That's another way to get some financial. VSBA offers course offerings where you can join a webinar or, something around a specific topic. I know Dave has sent stuff out occasionally. I think there was a webinar that you sent out, and so that's one way to get some training outside of. And years ago, that was where most of the training happened, was out in an outside at a VSBA meeting. So just to put that on people's radar, but we can definitely add that probably into the board retreat agenda, a piece of it. But
Is
there are,
I'm sorry, is everybody getting the notices from the VSBA except Andrea?
yeah, Annie's.
Annie, I mean, huh?
I receive
Okay.
them. Kevin's saying yes. Liz saying yes. Rob saying yes. Sarah. Yep. Kristen.
Okay.
Yep. It looks like Annie's the only one who's not receiving them. Okay. Any more comments around this motion? Liz.
I guess I would also add that something maybe similar, like there are fairly inexpensive financial literacy classes that can be taken, and kind of like we did with Brown Dog Consulting, is something that was in our own time and over the course of a few weeks or a couple of months that we could work our way through a literacy course that would maybe work really well, to be more flexible.
And then Rob, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I second what Liz says. I think, outside of board work, it's hard for me to maybe hop into another webinar or try to motivate or find the time, I should say. So if it was something like the Brown Dog that maybe we could do at our own leisure, but then possibly discuss, assuming the Wi-Fi is okay, wherever we have our board retreat, as a board, I think would both be helpful, find that synergy by doing it on our own time. So thanks for that suggestion, Liz and Sarah.
Sarah McLean.
Yeah, I want to echo what Liz and Rob are sharing. I think, finding time, especially within the past 6 months, to find and then join and then take and then digest a webinar solo. I wish I was the kind of person that could do that. Unfortunately not. And I think that it'd be really valuable to process the budgetary process with the board and the superintendent. And so folding that into the retreat or a meeting, I'm not sure, but doing it collaboratively.
Andrew.
Just a couple of thoughts to jump onto that. So I've wondered whether or not if it makes sense for everyone at the board level to be trained because folks rotate in and off the board, or if it would make sense for people of particular interest on the board that we have 2 or 3 people, not necessarily a subcommittee, but 2 or 3 people who just become, they're well trained in the budget building process and the financial aspects, and some other folks are doing the community engagement work. But that might be an area of interest we could explore for folks who also might be continuing to stay on the board for the long term.
Dave.
So I agree. We should have a finance committee, and that should be a committee that is trained specifically in budget matters.
Okay. Any other questions about the questionnaire and the motion to approve it and authorize the chair to sign? Okay. Right, Krista, are you in favor or opposed?
In favor.
Okay, Sarah McLean,
In favor.
Tim Blanchett,
In favor.
Rob,
In favor?
okay, Dave,
Yes.
okay, Kevin,
Yes.
Steve,
Yes.
Andrew,
Yes.
Liz,
Yes.
okay, Sarah,
Yes.
Annie.
In favor.
All right, so that one passed as well. Okay. Next item is to accept the monitoring report for 4.3 agenda planning.
So moved.
Andrew. Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Kristen. Okay. Does anybody fill out the worksheet and have any comments? Kevin, I got your worksheet. So Kevin.
So I still am struggling with, what is it, 4.3.2C or whatever it is with, it's gone from non-compliance to partial compliance or something or other, but I'm still struggling with the fact that this determination was based on an individual's request that was denied. And I think it's well within the board's chair's responsibility to have that latitude if it's not germane to the agenda, which after we discussed it the last time, it was sort of determined, at least in my mind, that it was not pertaining and were not germane to the agenda at that point. So I'd like to see it either modified or struck.
Sarah.
Yeah, so that the one denial of the request that a board member had made, in due time sparked the initial non-compliant, and then the change to partial compliant after had a chance to digest the policy and the process with Dawn, and Dawn was able to provide me more, email documentation of a variety of requests made by board members throughout the past year. Some that were requested within the 7 days and some that weren't, and just her process of going through whether or not she, she does add to the agenda the requested item or denies that it's added. And I think, my motivation for creating the form that board members would fill out when they make a request would be to just add process and transparency to the process of how the chair uses their authority, her authority, in the process of approving or denying, and then also gives the board member more agency in making a request, and so doesn't have to put the chair in the position of having to deny an inappropriate request to begin with. So it was originally, you're right, Kevin, it was based on the request that was denied and then further fleshed out for partial compliance based on a number of requests that were either accepted or denied.
Any more other feedback or comments on the monitoring report? Okay. Is anyone opposed to accepting the monitoring report? Kevin? Okay. And I'm assuming everyone else is in favor of accepting the monitoring report? Okay. Oh, can I ask you 2 quick questions? Was the interpretation reasonable? Okay. Yep, and some thumbs up. Okay. And did the data demonstrate the accomplishment of the interpretation? Right, so this motion passes. Okay. All right. The next item is an action item to add letters from the community to the board public records. So at the last meeting during public comment, there was a comment made requesting that some letters from the towns be added to the board public record. So,
Dawn, I'm sorry.
Yep.
One of the issues with the non-compliance that we just voted to approve, or the partial non-compliance, is that there's a suggestion of a route to come into compliance.
Right, that was the form, I believe Sarah was recommending, the use of the form to come into compliance.
Right. So does that mean by approving the report that we're adopting the form?
Well, what we'll have to go through the process of adding it, so we'll have to. My brain is stuck. So we'll have to.
I know, that happened to me too. I'm like, okay, well.
Yeah. So we'll have to go through a process like we did with the language change where we present, I can't even think of what the word is. We present it sort of for just to put it out there, and then I don't know why I'm having a brain block, but.
I can take a stab at it, Don. I think the process is anytime someone reports, as someone who has reported noncompliance, that's why I can speak to this from experience. When you report noncompliance, the expectation is you include a plan on how to become compliant. I don't think by approving or adopting the monitoring report that you adopt as a whole this plan. I think there's a recommendation on how to do this. I think there's a process to consider the recommendation, and you may tweak that plan. But there's something that launches you into action to move into compliance.
Well, that's specifically what I'm alluding to. Is
okay. So that way, what we could do on a future agenda item is put 4.3 and then have the discussion like, do we want this? This is the sort of recommendation at the plan to move forward, and we can do it that way. And then at that other meeting, if we decide, yep, that's what we want to do, then we do it.
That's fine. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yep. I'm writing myself a note, sorry. Okay. All right. So then we were on action. So the request was from a community member to add the letters from certain towns to the board public record. So when Patrick and I were talking about the agenda and we stumbled across this, how do we determine, we have a lot of letters from the community, and how do we choose some and not all or any? And we thought it warranted further conversation about how do we proceed with this one.
About how many are there, Dawn?
Let me see if I can figure it out.
Well, we get all sorts of feedback at all sorts of events, and are we putting all of that into the public record as well, or?
On.
Yeah.
We don't have a motion yet?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. Sorry. Yep, we don't. You're right. So can we have a motion just to stick to our process?
I'll move.
So moved.
Okay, Sarah and Andrew. Okay, now we can discuss. So Steve's comment was, what do we do about all the other feedback we received that is not added into public public record. Steve, again.
And, you know, and any other correspondence we happen to receive. Maybe not even specific to this issue.
Right.
Yeah, I was just wondering what constitutes public record? Like how is that held? And
So if somebody came and like last board meeting, somebody read something at public comment, and then that became, because it happened at the meeting, it was captured there on the video. So then they sent us a hard copy, and then that was sent to be attached to the minutes and kind of lives within the minutes or there. But many of the things we have received through email and that way, and not read at a board meeting.
Well, on the other hand, I would say that the parties did specifically request at the meeting as part of public comment to incorporate the letter, which saved us all from them having to read it again.
Right.
So I think they could have taken that step, and that would have been the same as the person who did read their letter. So in my mind, since they made the step of actually requesting it as public comment, that it probably should be incorporated.
Okay, Sarah LaPearl.
Yeah, I'm just curious what the purpose is. Like, what is the need for this? Because it is only certain people that are talking, and I'm just confused about the purpose of this format and where it lives. Same question as before.
So the purpose of the I need a little clarity of the
purpose of having to keep it on, or to put letters into public record. Like, where I don't know where it lives. Is there like a drive that everybody can then just go and open all the letters to? Like, a lot of them are already on Front Porch Forum, or I'm confused.
Well, those parties didn't request that they be made part of the public record. This party did at the meeting. And I would assume the letter would simply be attached to the meeting minutes.
Right, and that's what happened with that one particular piece.
So are we talking about those letters, or are we talking about every letter that a school board member has ever gotten is now going to go into some drive as a public record?
That's a discussion. I mean, this was a specific request, and so I think we needed to talk about to know how to handle this, because we've got a file on the Google Drive that is just a depository right now of all these letters. So does that mean we're going to have to include all them eventually, or that was what the need for the discussion was? Okay, there's a lot of hands up. So Rob, and then Dave, and I'll keep going.
Can you just directly reference the letter again? I'm 3 meetings in a week. I don't remember which letter it was.
It was Nancy Cornell mentioned the letter that the Starksboro zoning, or Starksboro, the town of Starksboro, it was either the town or the zoning.
No, it was a letter from the community that.
Oh, the community with a signature.
All the communities signed on to a similar letter.
Nancy's showing 2 fingers, so I think it was probably the Starksboro town letter and the one with all the signatures. She's nodding.
Yeah, I'm just trying to, thank you. Just a reminder, because we have had some letters. I mean, we've had a letter from the, Starksboro Select Board. We've had a letter from a legal opinion from, a lawyer representing the town of Lincoln. We've had a letter from Robinson Elementary staff. We've had a letter from Lincoln Communities, staff. I guess I don't know the process. I'm like Sarah, I don't know the process, what it's been in the past. And I guess if those people were to have read those statements at a board meeting, would that be then public record?
Yes.
So we're also in like these weird times too. It's hard to know if those people would have showed up and read the comments that maybe they've emailed us all. I don't know how to amend that. I'm just putting that out there that it's a weird time too, on top of all this.
Yep. So Dave?
So I'm not sure how much control we have over the notion of a public record. I'm certain that everything on the Google Drive is discoverable. And so then that could be defined as the public record. If we wanted to make something more officially part of a record, like attaching it to minutes, that may be a discussion that we want to have, what should be attached to the minutes or not. All of our individual emails regarding this subject is discoverable by attorneys should there be, court issues or reasons to discover what those communications were. So it's a bit of a caution to all of us as board members. Be careful what you write in these emails because it all can become public at some point. Certainly, I would suggest that the Google Drive is public. And like I said, if we wanted to make some vehicle sort of more public by attaching it to minutes, maybe that's the conversation we want to be having right now.
So Sarah McLean, and then I'll go to Kevin and get the next few board members.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting question. And, as far as like what's public record and what's not in the process to becoming that, I mean, I also think it calls into question how we're gathering this multitude of qualitative data that we're receiving. So we have all these, financial projections, and then we have the many, many letters, some written from individuals, some written from municipalities, from our towns, from small organizations, from schools. We have, these many paper surveys in which I've been told that there are many, many that have comments written in the margins. That is also qualitative data that we need to gather and be able to digest and see and consider as we, weigh our options moving forwards. So yeah, I'm unsure what's public and what's not. Maybe once we receive emails going forward, we reply, or Dawn, you reply. I don't know if this is just too much of a burden. Would you like this to be included in the public record? I don't know if that's a reasonable process. But yeah, I think that these correspondence need to be accessible to board members and the community somehow, maybe without identifying information. I'm not sure.
Kevin?
My train of thought is similar to Dave's. Is this stuff it's hanging out there, and if anybody wanted to ask for it, that would be given to them, and there's nothing secretive about it. So I guess what level of visibility do we want to give it? And for that matter, if it's buried in a comment section of minutes, you got to go through all sorts of minutes to find it. So I'm not sure what the advantage there. Regarding town letters and whatnot, one of the things I recall from our public discussion with Mr. Mubb is that anything a town does, they are not an entity to the district. So I don't know how much weight that really holds, even though it's the same piece of paper as an individual, but doesn't sound like there's a whole lot of weight to what towns are saying as an organization.
Andrew?
Sounds like there might be a distinction between what information we have available to us on a drive or shared among us for our understanding of what the community's thinking to inform our deliberations. And then the more formal matter of public record, it sounds like someone makes a request in a meeting. I would like this part of the public record, where therefore it sounds like that means it gets attached to the minutes. Yeah. And is accessible on the website. So to me, that sounds fine, and that should be an opt-in process versus that we do that for everyone, that we don't attach it to the minutes unless someone says, I'd like this to be part of the public record. And then we put that together just from sounds like from an administrative point of view and workflow issue.
Okay, Kristen, Majette.
So I just wanted people to know that the chair and co-chair, Krista and Dawn, are sending any emails that they get to us so we can read them too. I don't know if we should just send them somewhere to be distributed to everyone, if we each individually get one. You know, I'm also getting phone calls, talking to people on the phone, discussing things with people at the dump. I mean, we can't put everything in public record. I mean, I prefer to call people back than email because I communicate better that way. My brain works that way better. And there's no way I can put that in the public record. So, I mean, I think there's a limitation to it. And most of the discussions are just to clarify processes and facts, and, you know, people thinking something can happen, like we could today vote to merge with Virgins when really that's like a 18 or 24 month process. So most of it's just clarification of and listening to people. So again, I appreciate that Dawn and Krista are sending us emails that they get. And I guess the question out of that is, should we be sending those emails to someone who can then distribute to everyone, like every email that we get? I think there's also transparency in that, but there's only so many hours in the day. We've got 2 meetings a month coming up. Some of us are on committees. So again, I mean, I'm trying to read everything. I haven't gotten through all of it yet. I certainly will before August when we make that decision. I can on my vacation read them or something, you know, the ones I haven't gotten to. But anyway, that there's also, you know, Dawn can't spend her whole day being the hub of that probably, but over 7 months, maybe we could read everyone's emails. I don't know.
Steve.
So only one person has made this request. I think we should just limit the discussion right now to dealing with the matter at hand and not worry about the larger question of where all this information is going. So I'd like to move we honor this request, and if somebody else wants to add in the future items to the public record, they can come to our meeting and make that request specifically.
So we kind of have the action to add the letters from the community member to the board public record. So we don't really need a second motion on that. I think that as long as we understand that the intent is to honor the request for this particular.
Yeah, I agree. So I move.
Okay, yep, and
I'll second.
Yep. Is anyone opposed to this? I'm gonna mark it in favor and pass and call this a passed motion. I see no one's opposed.
Dawn, did we just amend that motion?
No, I think it was just a clarification because the motion was already to add letters from the community to the board public record. And I think what they decided was to honor this request.
Yes, I didn't amend the motion.
Okay.
All right. Okay. How's everybody hanging on? Everybody had the same kind of look. All right. So the next one is a timeline for the facilities decision making. So we want to make a motion and then we can get into a little bit of some clarification or discussion.
I'll move it.
Thank you, Andrew.
Rob seconds.
Okay. All right. So I'm wondering, because everyone got that timeline to look at, and I'm wondering if maybe, given that it's a lot to process and everything, maybe if tonight we take the time to think about that first meeting and what we want to accomplish at the first meeting, and then and what information we need to do that work at that meeting, and then leave like 15 or 20 minutes at the end of that meeting to plan for the next meeting and plan what we'll need and kind of go at it. I'm wondering if that approach might make this a little easier to work through if we start right now to think about that first meeting. What do we want to discuss? And you have like all those options that we put forth. I mean, if we saw something as a group that we think we should talk about first, then maybe that should be our first meeting that we plan. Sarah McLean.
Yeah, so in the document sent, it says, the February meeting is to talk about values. Is that right?
Well, that was an idea.
Right. And then just like in response to your comment of just focusing on that meeting, then I look, but I can't help but look to March, and it says March meeting is dealing with community proposals. So I don't know what proposals those are. And March is coming up close. As far as values go, I think it's a good conversation to have. Would that be fleshing out more of the survey results and looking at all of the correspondence we've received, or how would we have that discussion, I guess?
So, I mean, I think we get to dictate that or figure it out. But I think back to those very first 8 values that the community identified through all that work through the community engagement piece. And I think about that sort of being the yardstick that we use to measure things against, like, because really the value piece is like the basis for what we're entrusted to hold for our communities. So I kind of, in my mind, think like that's what we should be measuring things against. We should be looking at those values and looking at proposals and saying, do we see the value, that value, is it there in that proposal? I know Krista and I had talked about this earlier today, and Krista?
Well, I'm just going back and forth, and I'm still not clear what makes the most sense to talk about first. Is it these big, values questions, or is it looking at Patrick's proposal and looking at if there are other proposals we haven't considered and allowing those to guide the way we look at the values? And because I think one of the reasons I'm conflicted is that I think one of our struggles is the subjectivity of the values, and depending on where you sit and what your concerns are. And I think we're conflicted on this board about those. And I think that conflict is reflected in our community. We have a district goal, but we're made up of representatives of 5 really, uniquely different towns. And so I feel like, on the one hand, we need to really talk through that piece of things. Are we a board for a district, or are we a board made up of 5 towns, or can we be both of those things? But on the other hand, it's sort of hard to go, I'm not sure how we go through that exercise without knowing what's most viable. We've heard Patrick share with us what he thinks the most viable option is. We have, maybe there are other folks in the community who are working on alternatives to that. Evaluating those alternatives might help us get more clear on those values. So anyway, I don't really, And I don't really have an answer to how we work through that. I just know it needs to be grappled with in a really honest way, where we all feel like we can really share the challenges of this. Are we, what are we working toward, and what are the impacts of that?
So I'll go Dave and then Kevin.
So I don't mind having the values discussion. It will be a difficult discussion because of the points that were just made. My question is, how do I ask questions? I've been reprimanded for not giving enough time in the past. So I've tried to modify that approach. I just posed some questions and the answer I got was that, answering them to me as an individual board member was not sufficient. It had to be a board asking that question. So then we need to have some time somewhere for these types of questions to be grappled with as a board as to whether it's worth asking for answers to these questions. I have put a proposal on the table. One of the questions I would like to have answered is, how would that work? Would it work? Has any progress been made in that regard? What are some of the numbers around it and so forth? I've developed a list of 10 other questions and some of them are, one sentence answers. Some of them are going to take research. So that's my perspective. I don't mind having a values discussion, but what we need is a broader understanding of what the options are, what the possibilities are. I think there's a group in Lincoln that is developing proposals. I have said before, I think we have some educational experts. Maybe we should get DMG up here to work with our district individually. They do that. I don't know what they would charge. But for myself, I don't think Patrick's proposal will fly at this point without total disruption in our communities. Perhaps it's the best path forward, but we have to do a whole lot of preliminary work. New Haven feels like they're a winner because they're getting pre-K and the district offices. Starksboro and Lincoln feel like losers because they don't know what this innovation thing is all about. So we need to do a lot of work around what our options are, what the values are of those options, and what recommendations from some educational professionals might be.
And then I'll go Kevin, Rob, Andrew.
Actually, I think Andrew has had his hand up before me.
Oh, okay. All right, Andrew, Kevin, Rob. Andrew?
So I'm kind of feeling the same way Krista is I feel like just a general discussion about values is a bottomless pit that could go on forever. And I know that if I support, say my value is equity and outcomes for students, I have a certain idea about Patrick's plan. And I know that someone else who also values equity and outcomes might have a very different idea about his plan. So I think the values discussion in the absence of a specific plan could go just round and round. I would really like, since we, the board, asked Patrick for a plan and Patrick put forth a plan, that we really give that time to focus on his plan, the pros, the cons, how that sits with the values, how that sits with the survey data. I think we really need to give that some space first. So that once we fully understand how his plan would work, then we have some sophistication and nuance to compare that to any other plan that surfaces thereafter.
Kevin?
Well, I'm just reminded that last time we talked about a timeline, there was a matrix to guide the discussion. and for the various options. And it certainly makes sense to start the conversation with Patrick's proposal. I've said it before, I consider it the baseline, and somebody's got to come up with something better that hits all the marks to get my attention. But we really need to pass that through the same matrix or set of questions or considerations that are on that guideline, and look at it a little objectively as opposed to a lot of the emotion that's flushing around. And then go on, we've heard Lincoln's proposing something. Yeah, let's hear about it. And maybe there's a few other derivatives out there. And then maybe through that discussion, we can also start talking about our responsibilities as a board, and then finish that conversation up with a conclusion as to what and where we think we're going. So I'm in alignment with the timeline as it's been proposed. That, I mean, there's nuances and wordsmithing to go along with it, in my mind, but I think the framework's there, and take things and understand. We talk about experts and getting consultants in at, $10,000, $20,000 a whack or whatever, but we've got experts in our administration that have put forth a proposal, and I don't think we've given it the light of day yet. So I think that's the first order of business.
Rob?
Yeah, I guess I've missed where that matrix is, but I definitely want to look at it. My thoughts, I emailed some to you, Don, and Krista and Kevin today, so I won't go through all of them. But I think step one is, and community deserves that we as a board have an open and honest conversation regarding Patrick's proposal. I think that would maybe sort of set the tone moving forward for the next 7 months. Values obviously included in that conversation. I also think it'd be wise at that point to maybe think about the role of the board, the role of the community engagement committee, the role of the merger study committee, and how we can maybe find synergy amongst those groups as we move forward down the timeline. I don't think we can give ourselves too much time to think about that. And then after the board has that conversation, maybe as a board, we have another proposal. This is Patrick's proposal. This isn't our proposal. And, maybe we have some ideas too that we could chew on during that conversation. Then I think after that is, I think we should go on a listening tour. I would, and I don't know if this is a full board thing again. This could be a community engagement thing. This could be, but a listening tour of our faculty and staff. Maybe as a whole, maybe you break it out as each 5 towns, elementary school, and then we hear from Mount Abe. I think we just have to listen and hear what people say, or at least I would like to hear what other people say, and then go back to the community. But in the listening, I think we should also try to hopefully set people up to succeed in regards that they're not going to come with some pie in the sky, quote unquote solutions that just aren't honestly feasible in the framework that we have and are dealing with. So I don't know what that would look like, but maybe that's something we could discuss in our first meeting too, is how do we best set people up so that when they do come forth with an idea or a plan, it's something that is feasible. So that's my sense in the first couple months, is we just have the conversation as a board, and then go and listen to other folks.
Liz?
I think so I want for me, if I was looking for a document to think about the options, whatever options may come up, certainly including Patrick's. I have an ends policy in front of me. I have the let's talk or values in front of me, and I have a strategic plan. And as a board member, I found that the ends policy was challenging because it didn't have a lot of ways for me to specifically say whether a goal is being met or not met. And I think it's interesting with that. But the strategic plan, on the other hand, is a really important document. I think that we could use to measure options against, because it includes a lot on here. And I think, the specifically town schools may not be, but I think that's really the foundational thing that we're going to be talking about, the town schools. So certainly if a proposal came forward on how to make a town school work in a different way, I think that'll just naturally be a part of the conversation. And I just would like to note that the action team members and the planning steering committees that made this strategic plan and took so long to do that, we've got students, principals, we've got members from all 5 towns, all 5 schools, all different levels. I mean, it was so thoroughly and thoughtfully done between nurses. And I mean, I would just really encourage everybody to look at this and consider this as a way of measuring, because it also has breakdowns and goals. And I know we started with social emotional learning. And so I know that one has been broken down even further into a lot of actionable steps, like within the classroom and with the student. And, maybe as a community, we start to address some breaking down or gathering some information that we could use for the community goal. And I just noticed that it's measurable, and it just has everything. It has belonging, it has academic excellence, it has physical, it's such a great document that I just feel like we should utilize it now while we have the conversations, knowing that town schools is an inherent part of every discussion at this point.
Sorry, Sarah McLean.
Liz, I think that's such a great idea to use the strategic plan. And I know Krista had brought this up in our last meeting of kind of modeling the way that the strategic plan was built and using that model going forward with the facilities planning, just as far as, truly collaborating with community staff, students on facilities planning, fully, acknowledging that the timeline for the strategic plan was years and we're limited to a matter of months. That being said, I think, when part of the document that was provided that laid out, the 7-month extended timeline for the board, does give suggestions for topics for each month. I did want to call attention to that in the 7 months that the timeline has been extended, there's 4 additional meetings for facilities specific. That's what I saw. And I think that, I don't know if this is part of the action tonight, but we do need to ask ourselves, are 4 additional meetings enough? Because it looks like there's no meetings in June or July. Are 4 additional meetings enough to really kind of flesh this out? And then just back to Liz's point, how can, based on this document and conversations we've had as a board, how can we truly gather input from staff, community, in a meaningful way in digesting Patrick's recommendation and then being open to thinking through alternative, or, as Rob had said, just using that as a platform, and then we can come up with alternatives that may or may not work.
Andrew, do you have your hand back up? No, okay, Kristen.
Yeah, I just think of a couple of educators who have contacted me about their experience of teaching in districts with larger schools and really tiny schools, and just the disparities that they see in kids coming in academically. So also, could we have some information from universities and people that are experts on all this stuff? Like maybe at UVM or anywhere, I mean, just papers that have been written or current best practices and things like that, because while I'm not an educator, I've worked in schools for 20 years. And so I see stuff, I have my own opinions, and I know that over that time, you know, best practices have changed in many ways in different categories in the schools. And so what now are best practices for school size, et cetera, et cetera. So can we get some actual scholarly information also? And how would we do that? I don't know, but I mean, it's out there. We could probably Google a lot of it, but is there an expert that we could consult with and have answer our questions or present information? So that's just a question that I have.
Liz?
So there was a Picus and Odin report that I'm very slowly working my way through, but it did exactly that for the state of Vermont, and it recommended, it touched on best practice extraordinarily thoroughly. So maybe somebody that's really familiar with that document could come see us.
Liz, I missed the beginning. What document did you mention?
It's the Picus and Odin did a report for Vermont specifically. Okay. They worked across the country, but they did one for us. Yes. And about their best practice recommendations.
The Picus report is available at the legislative website. They actually did 2 reports. The DMG report is also available on the website.
So maybe we could collect all that, and I mean, we can each individually have a clearinghouse for that, so we could all be studying those things. But then also I think having someone come that we could ask questions to, so we're not just reading the document. I don't know who that would be. I mean, we're more than one person. Like I said, there's been people who have in the community who are educators in other districts who say, I have all this information, I'd love to give it to you, and then could I give it to the board? And to clarify, those are educators that live in the district and want to participate and help with giving information for decisions.
Steve?
I think everything that everybody has said, it sounds like great suggestions. Sounds like we might have a pretty full first meeting. And to add to that, I think there's a handful of options that were considered as part of the original study that I still see crop up in people's letters, like, why aren't we considering this? Why aren't we considering that? And they were considered, but they weren't necessarily fleshed out in a lot of detail in some of the proposals and reports. And it might be good to simply step back for a minute and let Patrick, you know, explain once again potentially why those particular options didn't work, which would also set people up, you know, to either ask more questions about them or at least not suggest them again. So we're not rehashing old ground. That's just one suggestion I have.
Liz, is your hand back up or is it still up from before? Okay. So, Sarah McLean.
Yeah, and to Dave's earlier point, how do we go about requesting additional information? Because, you know, I'm sure we're all receiving emails where community members want to see more information, whether it be a side-by-side analysis of how the peer pupil numbers were calculated for each individual elementary school, so that we can understand how those numbers were arrived at. Or yeah, I mean, there's a lot more information that we need, or fleshing out more of what an innovation site would look like. Because if in fact, Patrick's recommendation is the best road forward, then let's understand it, let's digest it. And then if in fact it is the best way, then we can communicate that. But until we are confident, which I think is part of the reasoning for extending the timeline, and without the enough information, I'm not sure how we can feel confident to communicate that out to our community. And I know that in the past, it seems like the process for requesting more information, it has to be a majority vote by the board. And is that how we're going to continue moving forward? Is that classically or traditionally how board members have had access to information from administration?
I can speak to sort of the practice we're trying to put in place. Questions that are kind of clarifying or are pretty straightforward that we can answer pretty expeditiously, we're trying to be really responsive to. Some questions, those simple questions require, and I can appreciate not knowing this when the questions are asked, but require literally days to pull together the information. And if I have a request from one board member on one set of questions, that's days worth of work. A different set of questions from a different board member, again, individuals asking if that's another days. Like we're talking about days and days and days and thousands of dollars of people's time in pursuing these interests or curiosities of individual board members. That's where I'm trying to be respectful of the capacity we have as an organization to track all this down. If as a board, there's agreement, yes, this thing that's going to take days to track down is something the board wants, by all means, we'll do that. But I'm cautious of spending days of teams of people's time pursuing an individual board member's request. So I'm trying to, just where it's reasonable, I'm trying to be responsive, and where it's going to be really time consuming, I'm pushing back and wanting to get some greater clarity from the board as a whole.
Krista?
I was wondering if we are starting with Patrick's proposal, for example. I know we asked, I don't know if it was specifically related to Patrick's proposal, but we asked lots of information, and Patrick presented, most of that back to us at our most recent meeting. I'm wondering if in this process, as we go through, if we know, like after our first meeting, a way that might be a best practice for before we wrap the meeting up is to say, okay, before the next meeting, what else would we like to know, or what questions do we still have? And that way, as we're moving through, we're asking about things that are coming up in our conversation at the board table. And hopefully that will bring to the surface, the themes that are pertinent to that part of the conversation. And as we weave through, more questions will come up, some might be answered. I don't know if that's one way to approach it, but our goal is to have our first meeting, I think, between now and our February board meeting, which is 2 weeks from now. So if for that first meeting, the focus is on Patrick's proposal, it might be worth thinking about what questions or information people want for that first meeting that we don't already have. And it's 9:30, so I don't know if that means we go through that now or by email or some other way, but.
And I would also add, finishing that response to the series of questions posed on December 22nd could fit into an earlier meeting as well. I know there's work to do there still, and I could be prepared with most, if not the rest of those unanswered questions for the next meeting.
Dave?
I just, never mind.
Okay. Sarah LaPearl?
Is there a date that I should know about when it is?
Is there a date for
Yeah.
February? Yes, February 9th is what we're looking at. That's 2 weeks before the regular, the 23rd. So, in that 2-week time frame period, we were thinking if information had to be gathered, that allowed 2 weeks for information to be gathered.
Thanks.
And I also wonder if, and maybe I can work with Don on this, if putting out some sort of a doodle poll to try and pin down dates for future meetings. I think if we're doing one meeting at a time and looking for dates at each meeting, that could be complicated. It'd be nice to lay out a series and everybody can get them in their calendars. And
I propose we just meet at the same day and time as our regular board meetings, only 2 weeks after or 2 weeks before. And maybe that's the poll, is just, does that work for you or not? But different days and times and days of the week and stuff, I think might get kind of complicated.
Steve?
Yeah, does the second Tuesday of the month work for everybody?
I think so.
If it does, we could just set it.
Okay. It seems like there's some agreement around that, so. Saw flashes of thumbs going up. Krista?
I just had 2 questions to help move this forward. One is, do we know what information we need for this meeting? And 2, who should build this agenda for this meeting, this first meeting? So for the first question, I'm wondering, do people want to spend time reviewing the survey? So we have that information already, but we can dedicate time to looking at that. And then we have Patrick's proposal. And if there's any other supporting information folks need, I think it would be good to just figure that out now. And then the other part is how specifically we're going to walk through the agenda. Is that something Dawn would develop, Dawn and Patrick?
Liz?
2 parts is just, I was wondering if you could point me towards the link to see all the comments that came with the surveys, because there was some space to add your own opinions. So I was hoping I would get to read through those. And also I wonder if Sue would help us with agenda building, maybe for these, that board meetings that we're doing here. Is Sue be willing to help us build those agendas?
Rob?
Liz, I mean, not Krista, I hope I'm not stealing your thunder with the next agenda item or 2 down, but so Krista and I are working through the comments from the surveys as well, not as we speak, but in trying to pull out any identifiable comments, trying to, and there's over 800 of them. So it's taking us much longer than I think we originally anticipated last week, to be just completely honest. So once those comments are a good once over, twice over, that those will be out there for all. And then, yeah, I do have a couple of questions I'd love to have at that next meeting, but I have them written out. So I don't know if it's best if I were to send them to you, Don, and then you can distribute them to the rest of the board and they can see if they'd want to hop on. You all know me, I tend to ramble and not make much sense. So I don't think I should just go off the cuff and try to ask them.
Okay, so let's get through comments and then sort of see where we are. Kristen and then Andrew.
There we go. Yeah, so I would be willing to collect the papers and reports that Liz and Dave were talking about, if they could send them to me, and then we could put them on the community engagement page, and I can work on trying to make everything in the same place. But at least if those were on there, we could read them. And then maybe from reading them, maybe people are cited in there that we could possibly consult with. But I think it would be good to have those all in the same place so we could find them. And if you guys wouldn't mind, Dave and Liz, sending those to me, I can make sure those get on there. And then in a couple of weeks, I'll have some time to sift through the website and try to put like everything in the same place. If I can work with Jennifer on that. Because I think those would be worth reading and looking at. Does that make sense?
I can get those to you.
Thank you. And I'll put them up this weekend just on that page somewhere, or I'll get it to Jen and then try to clean it up in 2 weeks.
Andrew.
To answer Krista's questions, so that's what I'd like to do in the next meeting, is to have a discussion about Patrick's plan in the context of the survey that we got, and how much the survey tells us, how much it doesn't tell us, what assumptions it makes, what other questions we need to have answered, how will we go about it, things like that. Probably getting much bigger than that. That in itself, those two items, I'm sure, could be a 4-hour meeting easily. And your second question, agenda. So I guess normally that would maybe be between you, Krista, and Dawn, and then Patrick, because it involves his proposal. So that's sort of normally how it would go, right?
Normally it's Patrick and I, yes.
Yeah, but knowing that, so I guess then just adding Krista or Rob because of your level of engagement with the survey.
Yeah. Do we have sort of an agreement with that first meet? Oh, Kevin, and then Steve.
I don't have a problem working through the survey and bouncing it against Patrick's proposal. But I also want to include the matrix, the values matrix, or whatever you want to call it, as a tool to do that as well. And if we can't do that in one meeting, I think it's important enough that we create the time to do that.
Okay. Steve.
Kevin, I think the matrix you're referring to is the one you guys worked with in the facilities committee.
No, it's one that Don came up with that is talks about collecting information based on the core values that were identified through public engagement. And then there's a series of questions after associated with that. She presented at last meeting when we talked about this series of meetings. So
it didn't get included.
You can find it in the previous meetings links, or maybe it should be sent out again.
No, I think I remember running across it. I just forgot. I thought you were talking about something else.
But it's a good roadmap, and and hopefully it'll get some thinking about those values realigned with the proposals, and as we go through that, not only that one, but some other ones as they show up.
Yeah. Patrick, I had a suggestion. Are you able to share the spreadsheet where you had the board questions and the answers? If you made that live, we could just type our questions into it, and then you could, whether we we could then go through them in the meeting and decide whether to spend your time on them or not, but that would be a clearinghouse for them anyway.
Yeah, that's not a problem to share that.
And people could just, Dave could ask his questions right there and they would be, all in one spot for everybody to look at.
I think that could work as long as we're all really cautious not to engage in a discussion in this document, because the VSBA has long since said even collaborating on a Google Doc is a violation of open meeting law. So I have reservations.
Well, it would be, we'd be asking the question basically in one column, and that's your role with the document, is to simply ask the question. And the responses we would be getting from Patrick would be the same, shared the same way we got them originally. They'd be shared in a meeting. So the one thing we would be doing with the questions is talking about them in an open meeting about whether we were going to spend his time on them or not. But at least we'd have some place where they'd all be compiled.
Krista? You're lit up.
Yeah, I was just thinking that we have a pretty good start for an agenda. So I think in what we've talked about, I'm not sure we need Sue's help for this first meeting, but we may down the road.
Yeah. And I think, under that timeline piece, we said work on the February meeting to work through Patrick's proposal with the district-wide values, equity, cost lens. So that covers some of the things people have said. And then instead of the values, we would be the survey discussion at the beginning of it. And then we'll build subsequent meeting agendas at a meeting together.
So I'm a little unclear about what kind of action we actually need tonight, Don, because we took action to extend the timeline already. Was the action to formulate an actual agenda for each meeting, or to simply?
Well, it was to have a discussion. So the action can be to take no action, just keep moving ahead with our plan. And now that we've worked together to build an agenda, and we'll sort of use this at the next meeting to build the next agenda. And
Yeah, I think that makes the most sense to me. I don't know if we really need a motion.
okay, so I'm guessing that, maybe I'm wrong, but since there was a motion by Andrew and Rob, that it sounds like we're gonna just, is everyone opposed to this action to determine the timeline, and we'll just go with the set agenda? Or do you want to document it another way? I'm sorry, it's getting very late and I'm having a hard time keeping my brain focused.
Yeah, it's just, in most of your, like you were saying in the previous action, that the action kind of made the motion.
Yeah.
This one, it doesn't really do that. So we sort of moved it ahead, but I'm not quite clear exactly what the motion is. And maybe the motion is just to meet every Tuesday, every second Tuesday, and leave it at that.
It could be. Yep.
Can I suggest something?
Yeah.
I moved to meet every second Tuesday.
Well, there's already,
and follow. Am I breaking up?
yeah, you are, but there's also already that initial motion to determine the timeline. So maybe you're just making a motion to amend it.
Yeah, sure. Well, I want to find a way to say that we will follow this timeline and general guideline for an agenda with the flexibility built in on both the time and the topic.
So that's your amendment to the original motion?
Yes.
Okay.
Because I think it's important to just remind ourselves that we can, like to Sarah's point earlier, is this enough meetings, you know, that we can revisit along the way. We can decide to do things a little differently along the way. And we've shown that we can be flexible when we need to be. So I just wanted to consider a motion that reminds us of that.
I second the amendment.
Okay, so Liz. Okay. Any discussion of the amendment? Okay, so the amendment is to follow the guideline and outline, be flexible with our time and topic, and the second Tuesday of the month will be our meeting day around this. Is everyone in favor of that? Give me a thumbs up so I don't have to read everybody's name. All right. Okay, so that passed. I'm seeing all thumbs. All right, so now back to the whole motion with the amendment to determine the timeline, to commit to the second Tuesday of the month, to follow the guidelines and outline and be flexible with time and topic. Are you in favor of that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, I can't see. I've lost somebody. Okay, so that one passed. Okay, now, community engagement committee update.
Okay, this is pretty quick, but Patrick, can I just, maybe I can already do it. Hang on. Yeah, I'm going to just share my screen only because there are a couple links in here, and this update will be posted in the minutes, and these links will then be shared out with the community. But for anyone who's on and wants to look at them now, I wanted to be able to show them. And this, oh, I think you need to give me the power to do that, Patrick. I think Nancy Cornell is the host now.
Did I hit the wrong box? Let's try this again.
I think you might have.
Nancy, can you make Krista host?
Oh, right. You have to do that. And I know it's our goal to have these reports in advance of the meeting, so I apologize. Nancy, I think if you're still there, I need you to turn her hosting over so I can.
This could be a new Zoom game. We could just reassign the host.
Aha, there she goes.
Notices.
Let's play
Okay.
host.
All right, here we go. Sorry. Okay, Patrick, can you see what I have? I can't hear you. Can you guys see my screen?
Not yet. It says
No?
you're sharing your screen, but it's blank.
Oh, golly.
Oh, there it is. Now I can.
All right, there it is. Okay, sorry, it sounds like my internet. Can you hear me okay?
Make it bigger.
Yeah, okay. So there's, I wanted to share this because you can see that Rob and I cleaned up the raw data so that we can now share it with the public. So the 3 links here, which the first one is the presentation of the results, and the second one is the summary provided by the Center for Rural Studies, upon which the presentation last week was built. Those 2 links were already shared out, but the summary link was embedded in the presentation, so it was a little harder to find. So I've pulled those out, and then we added the link to the raw data, which is new. And so the raw data, it's all of the responses minus the comments. And because you can see in our next steps, that's what Rob and I are working on now. Really want to get those comments out to folks as soon as we can. There's a lot of great info in there. We just need to go through and make sure that names have been removed. Did have a question, and this does not need to be answered now, and it maybe is something we can talk about in 2 weeks, which is whether we want to have an analysis done of that qualitative data. It is a time-consuming process to theme qualitative data, but it could be really valuable. And so it's something to talk about. So the survey is out there. And then I wanted to talk about the communications plan. We've had lots of different conversations about how we're communicating. And I'm recommending that for our regular board meeting, that we put the board communication plan on the agenda for review. So we built it about 2 years ago. And now that we're really in the weeds of this process, I think it's a good time to look at it again. Different issues have been raised. And so I think we should see whether this policy process that we developed is holding up as well as we want it to. And then the last thing is, as we move forward on our timeline, I think once the board decides how we want to connect with the community, then it would make sense to reconvene the community engagement committee to get input on how that might look. So I think it's important for the board to figure out how we want to proceed with this timeline and what the role will be of involving our community. And then I hope that we can reconvene that committee to work on making that happen and to provide additional input. So that is all I have. And again, those links to the survey, they will go on the MAUSD webpage in the facilities planning section. And then we'll get them out in our other usual ways so everyone can see them.
Any questions? All right, moving along. Dave, I don't know if you have a legislative update. I'm not sure if Dave's still here. He's gone from my screen. I'm not seeing him anymore. Okay, move on. A discussion, the prep for the annual meeting. In the past, we've developed a little skit or script of topics and to discuss. And actually, I'm thinking about when we in the past attended the town meetings. That was the script. So this is prep for the annual meeting on the 23rd. Patrick, do you know if we'll have supports to help with the Zoom function?
I guess I'm not sure what you mean by supports to help with.
Well, I mean, like, you know, in the past, like the co-host idea where somebody can be watching for the mics and that whole piece.
Yeah, I'll look into the co-hosting. It sounds like from what Sean was saying earlier that that's a setting on the website itself for meetings, so we can look into the co-hosting ability.
And do we know, I mean, is Pam comfortable with Zoom? I don't know how a moderator works with Zoom.
We can reach out to Pam and ask her. And I can come up with some ideas for supports based on what Pam says.
Okay.
I do think, and this is on the board work plan that's set at the retreat, this concept of prepping for the annual meeting. And of course, this is a different annual meeting than we've ever experienced. But I do think, to your point earlier, Dawn, part of this discussion has included what's the sort of statement that if people were attending in person, the town meetings, that would sort of be that script. Again, I think, I'm not sure, I'm not aware of any town that's holding an in-person town meeting, even with a date moved to something later. I think my understanding is that towns have put votes that typically happen from the floor into an Australian ballot as well. So it may be a moot point. I don't know that there's going to be an in-person audience at some point in time for a script to come from board members that represent that town. But we kept it on here because it was on the work plan, and it may not have a place this year. Having said that, I think there's some value as we have a lot of community members talking about things to think about what is a message that the board would convey if it had an opportunity to convey it, because in reality, you probably have dozens of opportunities each week to convey some sort of message.
Steve has his hand up. Nope, you're still muted.
Don, I'm assuming that you've probably already put together a letter for the report.
It's partially done. And that's another piece. Like, my plan is to still do the chair letter. I'll send it off to Krista as my vice chair and to Kristen Blanchette as the communications secretary. But that's due like this weekend. So I always wait till after the budget's approved so that we can put a section in about the budget itself to provide information.
Well, I wouldn't object if you wanted to send a draft of that out to everybody, just so that, I mean, what else would we say other than what you're going to say in that letter anyway? I mean, it's kind of a wrap up of the year normally anyway, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. So what I may do is send it to the two of them, and then once we fine tune it a little more, then send it out as a draft. Just remember to not reply all. If you have a comment to make, just make the comment only to me, please. Any other concerns or comments? Okay. All right. We are not in need of an executive session. So is there any public comment for the diehards that have hung in there? Is there any public comment? Paul.
Hi, Paul Forlenzer from Lincoln. In March on the agenda, it says consider other proposals. I'm just wondering when you would like those submitted and in what form. Do you want a presentation? Do you want a document? What would you like? You can think about it. I don't need an answer now, but at some point it'd be nice to have that answer.
Okay, I think we'll hash that out at the February meeting. We'll have an idea and may be able to get in contact or to send a message out so that everybody knows at that point.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other public comment? Okay. Now we have the meeting evaluation.
I've got it.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris.
Can you tell I was ready? What is the level of engagement of all board members, high or low?
High.
All right. Was the agenda followed, yes or no?
Yes.
Thoroughly.
Any comments? Going once?
Yeah.
Going twice? Sold. Okay. Does the chair effectively establish the agenda and materials for distribution to the board? Yes or no?
Yes.
Any comments? Going with none. Okay. Is the chair effective in fostering a professional culture regarding fair and open deliberation, full participation of all members, and ensuring the integrity of the board process? Yes or no?
Yes.
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 Any comments? Wow, we got the crickets tonight. Okay. Other feedback for the chair?
Thanks for all your work, Dawn.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Don.
Thank you. And I will say, when we hit town meeting day, this is my 20th year.
Oh,
Oh my God.
This is what insanity looks like.
what went well with the meeting?
We
Done
survived.
before 10.
Student participation.
Very good comments. Very good discussion.
Anything else?
Patrick, I think you need to get one of those plaques gilded to give to Don.
Yes, for sure.
We'll find some extra thick plexiglass for Dawn. Bulletproof.
What suggestions do you have for ways to improve future meetings? Nothing?
Nothing.
No
Cake.
way to improve these.
Cake.
Cake, okay. Cake is always good. All right, and that's a wrap.
All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Sarah Roberto. All those in favor of adjourning at 9:56, say aye.
Aye.
Good night, everyone.
Good night,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Good night.
All
I
right.
don't have to see you in 2 days. Sorry. I'm excited. Thanks.
Bye.